Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've debated for months whether to share this. Most people I've told think I'm making it up or was hallucinating from pain. But I know what happened that night in Mount Rainier National Park last August, and I need to get it off my chest. I'm an experienced hiker, been doing solo treks for over 15 years. I've encountered bears, mountain lions at a distance, and all kinds of wildlife. Nothing prepared me for what happened in the summer of 2009. It was supposed to be a 5-day trek through some of the more remote sections of Mount Rainier. I'd planned the route carefully, packed all the right gear, and was feeling good after the first 2 days. The weather was perfect. Clear skies around 70 degrees during the day, cool at night. On the third day, I was crossing a rocky slope about 6 miles from the nearest trailhead when disaster struck. 1 second I was picking my way across, the next my foot slipped between 2 rocks and I felt this sickening crack. The pain was immediate and blinding. I knew right away my ankle was broken. It twisted at an angle that made me nauseous just looking at it. I tried my cell, but there was no signal, which wasn't surprising given my location. I did a quick assessment of my situation. 6 miles from help, broken ankle, getting late in the day. I needed to set up camp and figure out a plan. I managed to crawl to a small clearing about 50 yards from where I fell. It wasn't ideal, a bit too enclosed by trees for my liking, but I couldn't go any farther with the pain. I got my tent up, took some painkillers, splinted my ankle as best I could with my trekking poles and bandages, and tried to keep calm. My plan was to wait until morning, then start the slow, painful crawl back to the trailhead. It would take all day, but it seemed like my only option. As dusk fell, I heated up some food, drank plenty of water, and settled in for what I knew would be an uncomfortable night. Around 9 p.m., I was lying in my tent listening to some music on my iPod when I first heard it. Heavy footsteps moving through the undergrowth around the clearing. My first thought was bear, so I turned off the music to listen more carefully. The footsteps were strange, really widely spaced, like whatever was walking took big, deliberate steps and heavy. I could feel subtle vibrations in the ground, but the rhythm was all wrong for a bear. Bears have a distinctive gait, and this wasn't it. This was slow, methodical, almost like a person, but much heavier. I called out, thinking maybe it was another hiker, though that seemed unlikely given my location. No response. The footsteps paused, then continued, now clearly circling the perimeter of my clearing. By 10 p.m., the footsteps were still circling, but something else hit me. The smell. I've smelled bear before, but this was different. It was this powerful, musky odor, like wet dog combined with rotten meat, and something else I can't even describe. It was so strong it seemed to seep into my tent. That's when I started getting really scared. The combination of the strange gait, the size implied by the heaviness of the steps, and that smell. I knew this wasn't a bear or any animal I was familiar with. I zipped my tent completely closed and turned off my flashlight, hoping that whatever it was would lose interest and move on. It didn't. Instead, at around 11 p.m., the footsteps changed direction and came directly toward my tent. I lay completely still, barely breathing, as they stopped right outside. Then I heard it, deep, heavy breathing, so close it couldn't have been more than a foot from my head. I was absolutely terrified, but remained motionless. Then something happened that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. A large hand, I'm certain it was a hand, pressed against the wall of my tent. I could see the outline through the fabric, long fingers spreading out across the nylon. The hand was enormous, much bigger than mine would be, and I'm not a small guy. After a few seconds it withdrew. I heard more footsteps as whatever it was moved around to the other side of my tent. Then another hand pressed against that side, as if it was trying to figure out what was inside. Throughout the night, this pattern continued. The creature, and I'm convinced now it was a Sasquatch or Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it, circled my tent for hours. Sometimes it would move away, and I'd hear it at the edge of the clearing, but it always came back. It made noises too. Deep grunts that vibrated in my chest. Strange wood-knocking sounds, two sharp cracks that would come from one direction, then answer from another, making me wonder if there was more than one of them, and these eerie, high-pitched whoops that echoed through the trees. The worst moments were when it would get aggressive. Several times it pulled at the corner of my rainfly, hard enough that I thought the stakes would rip out. It slapped the ground right next to my tent with such force that my whole tent shook. Each time I remained absolutely silent, clutching my hunting knife, though I knew it would be useless if the creature decided to come in, and fighting the urge to scream or call out. Every instinct told me that making noise would only make things worse. I felt like prey that had been found by a predator, and my only chance was to seem as non-threatening as possible. Around 1 a.m., it started a new behavior that nearly broke me. It began picking up my gear that I'd left outside, my cooking pot, my backpack, and throwing them. I heard metal clanging against trees, fabric tearing. At one point, it picked up what must have been my water bottle and crushed it, the plastic making this horrible cracking sound. By 2 a.m., I was physically exhausted from the tension but couldn't sleep. My ankle throbbed, I was dehydrated from fear sweating, and I kept thinking about how vulnerable I was. If it wanted to, this thing could have torn through my tent in seconds. Around 3 a.m., it did something that still haunts me. It made this series of sounds, almost like speech, but not quite. Deep, guttural vocalizations that had a rhythm and pattern to them. It wasn't random animal noises. It felt deliberate, like it was trying to communicate something. The night dragged on endlessly. At 4 a.m., the creature seemed to calm somewhat. The footsteps became less frequent, though it still circled the tent occasionally. The knocking and whooping had stopped, but the smell remained intense, confirming it was still nearby. Just before dawn, around 5:30 a.m., I heard the footsteps retreat into the forest, the sound growing fainter until I couldn't hear them anymore. I waited a full hour after sunrise before I dared to unzip my tent and look outside. What I saw confirmed everything. The clearing, which had been relatively undisturbed when I set up camp, now looked like a battlefield. There were large areas where the grass was completely flattened in circular patterns. My cooking gear was scattered everywhere. My backpack had been torn open, and my food was gone. Not just spilled, but completely missing. Most convincing were the footprints. In several muddy patches near my tent, there were clear impressions, huge, human-like footprints that must have been at least 16 inches long. I could make out toe impressions in some of them. No bear or known animal makes tracks like that. Looking up, I noticed broken branches on the surrounding trees at heights I couldn't reach, 8 to 9 feet off the ground. Something tall and strong had snapped them, and recently, the breaks were fresh with sap still oozing. I spent the morning painfully gathering what remained of my gear. Around midday, by sheer luck, a group of hikers passed close enough to hear me calling for help. They were understandably skeptical about my story, focusing instead on my injury, which by then was badly swollen. They contacted the rangers via their satellite phone, and a rescue team reached us that evening. I was hesitant to tell the rangers the full story, just saying I'd heard some large animal during the night. It wasn't until I was safely at the hospital that I shared the complete account with one ranger who seemed more open-minded. He didn't outright dismiss me. Instead, he mentioned that there had been other strange reports from that area over the years. Nothing officially documented, of course, but rumors among the staff. He took detailed notes and promised to check the location, though I doubt anything came of it. I've spent countless hours since then trying to rationalize what happened. Could it have been a bear? Multiple bears, people playing an elaborate prank? None of these explanations fit what I experienced. The creature was bipedal, intelligent, and curious. It seemed aware that I was injured and unable to escape. It investigated me thoroughly, but never attacked, despite having every opportunity. It communicated with others of its kind. It displayed behaviors that don't match any known animal. I'm certain that what circled my tent that night was a Sasquatch. I can't prove it, and I've stopped trying to convince skeptics. But I know what I experienced, and I haven't gone hiking alone since. Some nights, I still wake up thinking I can hear those heavy footsteps circling my house. And that distinctive smell sometimes comes back to me so vividly that I have to check that all my windows are closed. Whatever is living in those remote areas of Mount Rainier, it's real, and it knows we're there. Story 2. I've never been the type to share this kind of thing, but I need to get it off my chest. It's been eating at me for years now, and maybe writing it down will help me process what I saw that evening. I still get chills thinking about it. I was 13 years old. It was mid-October, and my mom and I were visiting my aunt who lived in rural Pennsylvania. She had this old farmhouse that sat on about 5 acres, with a big open field on one side that backed up to dense woods. The property had been in our family for generations, and my aunt inherited it after my grandparents passed. That evening, we'd just finished dinner. The 3 of us had been sitting around the kitchen table, and my mum asked me to run out to the car to grab her cigarettes. She'd left them in the center console, and since I was the kid, I got volunteered for the job. I remember being a little annoyed because it was getting dark and the temperature was dropping fast. My aunt's gravel driveway crunched under my feet as I walked out to my mum's Taurus. The sun was just setting, and everything had that golden orange glow. The car was maybe 30 yards from the house, parked facing the field. I found the cigarettes no problem, and was about to head back when something caught my eye. There was movement across the field, right where it met the tree line. At first, I thought it was a deer. We'd seen plenty of them around my aunt's property before, and they'd often come out at dusk to graze in the open areas, but then I realized whatever it was stood on 2 legs. I froze with my hand on the car door, just staring. My first thought was that it was somebody walking along the edge of the property, maybe a neighbor or a hunter, but something felt wrong about the way it moved. This thing was tall, really tall. I'm not great with estimating height, especially at that distance, but it towered over the fence posts at the edge of the property, which I knew were about 5 feet high, and its proportions were all wrong for a person. The arms were too long, hanging down almost to its knees. It walked with this weird, slouched posture that made its shoulders hunch forward, but despite the slouch, it moved with purpose, taking these long, powerful strides across the field. The weirdest part was how fast it covered ground. The field was maybe 200 feet across, and this thing crossed most of it in what felt like seconds, not running, just walking with these enormous strides. It moved smoothly, almost like it was gliding. I could see it clearly enough to tell it was covered in dark fur, brownish black and thick. The fur seemed to move with the wind, and it was shaggy enough that I couldn't really make out the body shape underneath. It wasn't like a costume. The movement was too natural, the way the fur shifted as it walked. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wasn't exactly scared at that moment, more frozen in disbelief. You know that feeling when your brain can't process what your eyes are seeing, like that. The thing never looked in my direction. It just kept walking with those long swinging arms, moving across the field toward the denser woods on the other side. I watched it until it disappeared into the tree line, and then I stood there for another minute or two, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. When I finally snapped out of it, I realized I was shivering, partly from the cold, but mostly from shock. I ran back to the house, nearly dropping the cigarettes on the way. I must have looked pretty shaken up when I got back inside because my mom immediately asked me what was wrong. I hesitated. Even then, I knew how it would sound if I told them I'd seen some kind of monster in the field. I was 13, old enough to know better than to make up stories about seeing Bigfoot or whatever. But it wasn't a story. I saw something out there. I ended up mumbling something about being startled by a deer, and my mum seemed to buy it. We spent the rest of the evening watching TV in my aunt's living room, but I couldn't focus on anything. I kept replaying what I'd seen over and over in my head. Later that night, when my mom went to take a shower, I found my aunt alone in the kitchen. Something compelled me to tell her, maybe because it was her property, or maybe because she'd always been the weird one in the family who believed in ghosts and had all these strange books about supernatural stuff. "Aunt Carol," I said, keeping my voice low even though my mum was upstairs, "I saw something weird in the field earlier." She looked up from the crossword puzzle she was working on, raising an eyebrow. "What kind of weird?" I described what I'd seen, the tall figure, the way it walked, the dark fur, how fast it moved. I expected her to laugh or tell me it was just my imagination, but she didn't. She set down her pencil and stared at me for a long moment. Then she just said, "Weirder things have been seen out there." That was it. No explanation, no questions, no, "Are you sure it wasn't just a person?" Nothing. Just that cryptic response. And then she went back to her crossword like I'd just commented on the weather. I wanted to press her for more information, but something in her expression told me not to. It was like she was deliberately closing the door on the conversation. And honestly, her calm reaction freaked me out more than if she'd been skeptical. That night, I barely slept. My aunt had put me in the guest room that faced the field, and I kept getting up to look out the window, half expecting to see that figure standing there, looking back at the house. The wind picked up around midnight, and the branches of the old oak tree kept scratching against the side of the house, making me jump every few minutes. At one point, around 2 in the morning, I swear I heard something moving around outside. Not like an animal. It was heavier, more deliberate, like footsteps circling the house. I pulled the blankets over my head like a little kid and stayed completely still until morning. We left the next day after lunch. As we were packing up the car, I kept looking across that field, trying to convince myself that what I'd seen had a simple explanation. Maybe it was just a very tall person in a dark coat. Maybe the distance and the fading light had played tricks on my eyes, but I knew better. On the drive home, I tried to bring it up with my mom, testing the waters by asking if she'd ever heard stories about strange things in the woods near Aunt Carol's place. She gave me this weird look and said, "Your aunt has always been superstitious. Don't let her fill your head with that nonsense." And that was that. I didn't bring it up again. Over the years, I've done some research. I've looked up Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania, read about local legends, tried to find some explanation for what I saw. There have been reports in that area. Not many, but enough to make me wonder. Some descriptions match what I saw pretty closely. I'm 28 now, and I've only told 3 people about this. My best friend in high school, who thought it was hilarious. My college girlfriend, who thought I was making it up to scare her. And now, all of you. I've never treated it as a joke or a scary story to tell at campfires. It never felt right to do that. The thing is, I'm not claiming I saw Bigfoot or some mythical creature. I'm just saying I saw something that day that I can't explain. Something that didn't move like a human, but definitely wasn't a bear or any other animal I'm familiar with. Last year, I went back to visit my aunt. She's in her 70s now, living alone in that same farmhouse. I finally worked up the courage to ask her about that day, to see if she'd elaborate on what she meant by "weirder things have been seen out there." She got this distant look in her eyes and told me that the property has always had visitors, that her father, My grandfather had encountered something similar back in the 1950s while hunting, that there were stories going back generations about people of the forest who kept to themselves but occasionally were spotted crossing the field. When I pressed her for details, she clammed up just like she had 15 years earlier. All she would say was, "They've never bothered us, and we don't bother them. That's been the arrangement for longer than I've been alive." I drove back home with more questions than answers. Part of me wants to stake out the field next time I visit, to see if I can catch another glimpse. But a bigger part of me is terrified of actually finding something. What bothers me most isn't the possibility that these things, whatever they are, might exist. It's the idea that my family has known about them for generations and just accepted it, like it's normal to share your backyard with creatures that aren't supposed to exist. Sometimes I wonder if I really saw what I think I saw. Memory is tricky, especially childhood memory. Maybe it was just a tall person in a dark coat. Maybe the rest, the inhuman proportions, the impossible speed, the way it moved. Maybe I added those details later, influenced by stories and movies. But then I remember how still I stood by that car, watching it move across the field. I remember the goosebumps that raised on my arms, not from fear, but from the instinctive recognition that I was seeing something that didn't fit into my understanding of the world. I remember how certain I felt in that moment, and still feel now. Whatever I saw that evening wasn't human. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not even sure I want you to. But it happened. And now, 15 years later, I still find myself scanning the edges of fields and forests when I'm in rural areas, half hoping, half dreading that I'll see that tall, slouching figure again. Story 3. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened last August. I've been sitting on this experience for months now because, honestly, who the hell would believe me? I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. For context, I work in Stewart and live in Jupiter, Florida, which means I drive along US 1 twice a day, 5 days a week. It's about a 20-minute commute each way, nothing special, just your typical Florida highway bordered by patches of wilderness and developed areas. I've made this drive hundreds of times in all kinds of weather and light conditions, so I know every curve and landmark. This happened on a Thursday evening in August. It was one of those brutally hot days where the humidity makes it feel like you're breathing through a wet towel. I'd stayed late at work finishing up some paperwork, probably around 8:30 or so when I finally headed out. The sun had already set, but there was still that fading blue light on the horizon. You know how Florida gets that weird twilight where everything looks slightly off color? Traffic was light, which was nice. I had my AC blasting and was just listening to a podcast, trying to decompress after a long day. I wasn't particularly tired or distracted. If anything, I was more alert than usual since I was driving later than my normal time. I was heading south, approaching that stretch of road that runs alongside Jonathan Dickinson State Park. If you're not familiar, it's this massive state park, thousands of acres of protected Florida wilderness. It's beautiful during the day, but at night, it's just this dark void on the west side of the highway. That's when I first noticed it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. You know how sometimes your brain tries to make shapes out of shadows? That's what I initially figured was happening. There was this large, dark figure moving along the side of the road, just at the edge of where my headlights reached. It was walking north, toward me, on the west side of US 1. What caught my attention first was the size. Even from a distance, I could tell this thing was massive, like unnaturally big. As I got closer, I instinctively eased off the gas. My brain was trying to categorize what I was seeing. Was it a really tall person, someone on stilts, a bear standing upright, which would be bizarre in South Florida? But it wasn't any of those things. The figure was easily 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It had the build of a massive football linebacker with shoulder pads on, extraordinarily broad through the upper body. But what made absolutely no sense was what appeared to be a full-length, shaggy coat in August, in Florida. When it was still in the high 80s, even after sunset, as I slowed down more, I noticed a pickup truck ahead of me also slowing down. The driver must have spotted the same thing I did. The truck practically crawled past the figure, then suddenly accelerated hard and sped away. That's when I knew I wasn't imagining things. Someone else had seen it too and had the same, "What the hell was that?" reaction. By this point, I'd slowed to maybe 20 miles per hour. There weren't any other cars behind me, so I wasn't worried about causing an accident. I just couldn't take my eyes off this thing. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I remember my palms were sweating on the steering wheel, and I had this cold feeling washing down my back despite the warmth of the car. When I was parallel with it, maybe 20 feet away, I got the clearest view. What I initially thought was a coat wasn't clothing at all. It was fur, dirty white fur, like an old shag carpet that hasn't been cleaned in decades. It hung from its body in long, matted strands that swayed slightly as it walked. The color wasn't pure white, but this yellowish gray, like old bone. Its face is what stays with me the most. It was ape-like, but not exactly like any ape I've seen in zoos or documentaries. The face was set deep under a pronounced brow, with a noticeable bump or ridge on the top of the head. Its eyes were deep set, and I couldn't make out their color in the dim light, but they seemed to reflect my headlights for just a moment, like animal eyes do. The strangest part of the whole encounter was how it completely ignored me. It didn't acknowledge my car slowing down. It didn't turn its head or make any gesture. It just kept walking with this deliberate, steady pace. Not hurried, not aggressive, just moving with purpose, like it had somewhere specific to be. Its arms were proportionally longer than a human's, swinging slightly with each step. The hands were large, but I couldn't make out details of the fingers in the dim light. Its gait was smooth but unusual, longer strides than a human would take, with a slight roll to each step. I must have been alongside it for only 5 or 6 seconds, but it felt like minutes. Time does weird things when you're in shock. I remember thinking I should grab my phone to take a picture, but my body wouldn't respond to the thought. I was frozen, just staring. When I passed it, I looked in my rearview mirror and could see its silhouette continuing north, never breaking stride, never looking back. I drove another quarter mile or so before pulling over onto the shoulder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. I sat there for maybe 15 minutes, trying to process what I'd just seen. Was it someone in a costume? But why would anyone be walking along US 1 at night in a full-body fur suit in the middle of summer? And no costume could fake that height and build convincingly. The movements were too natural, too fluid. The thing is, I'm not a believer in the paranormal or cryptids or any of that stuff. I'm pretty pragmatic. I need evidence. But what do you do when you're the one who sees something impossible? I didn't have a dash cam. I didn't get a photo. All I had was what my eyes saw, and even I wasn't sure if I could trust them. I drove home in a daze that night. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell my co-workers the next day. What would I say? Hey, I'm pretty sure I saw Bigfoot last night, but it was white and walking along US 1. They'd think I was having a breakdown or playing a weird joke, so I kept it to myself for nearly 3 months. I drove that same stretch of road every day, always scanning the tree line, always hoping for, and simultaneously dreading, another glimpse. Nothing. Just the same familiar highway. Then last week, something happened that made me question my sanity all over again. I'm in real estate, and I was meeting with a prospective client who mentioned he worked as a park ranger at Jonathan Dickinson. We were having coffee, just casual conversation before getting into the property details, when I found myself blurting out, "This might sound crazy, but I saw something really strange near the park a few months back." I immediately regretted saying anything. This was a potential client, not my therapist. But he just looked at me with this expression I can't quite describe. Not surprise, more like careful interest. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice oddly quiet. I gave him the short version, expecting him to laugh or change the subject. Instead, he nodded slowly and said, "You're lucky, you know. Not many people get to see one." My coffee cup froze halfway to my mouth. One what? He didn't answer directly. He just asked for more details. Exactly where I saw it, what time, which direction it was heading. I told him everything, and he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned forward and lowered his voice. "We don't talk about them officially. Can't, but there've been sightings in that park for decades. The old-timers who've worked there 30-plus years have all kinds of stories." "So you believe me?" I asked, feeling this bizarre mix of relief and new anxiety. "Let's just say you're not the first person to tell me something like this," he replied. "And you described it exactly like others have. The size, the dirty white fur, the way it ignores people. We have over 10,000 acres of wilderness in that park. There are places humans hardly ever go." I wanted to ask more questions, but he clearly wasn't comfortable saying much else. He changed the subject back to real estate, and I took the hint. Since that conversation, I can't stop thinking about what's out there in those woods. I've lived in Florida my whole life and thought I knew all the wildlife, the alligators, the panthers, the bears. But this was something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist here or anywhere. Every time I drive that stretch of US 1 now, especially after dark, I scan the roadside constantly. Part of me hopes I'll see it again, just to confirm I'm not crazy. Another part hopes I never do. The weirdest thing is how normal that creature seemed in its own skin. Not hiding, not sneaking, just existing, like it had as much right to be there as any other animal. Maybe more right than us. I still don't know what to call what I saw. Bigfoot doesn't seem right. That's a Pacific Northwest thing, right? And they're supposed to be dark-furred, not this dirty white color. Whatever it was perfectly adapted to its environment and completely unafraid of human presence. Sometimes I wonder if it watches us from the trees as we drive by, completely oblivious. How many other strange things are out there that we miss because we're not paying attention? Or because we've convinced ourselves they can't possibly exist? I don't have answers. Just questions and the memory of those few seconds when my understanding of the world shifted permanently. I can still see it perfectly in my mind. That massive figure with the matted white fur, walking purposefully into the gathering darkness, carrying its secrets back into the wilderness. Story 4. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. What happened to me 50-some years ago still keeps me up at night sometimes. I'm not looking for attention or trying to convince anyone of anything. I just need to get this off my chest. It was July 27th, 1969. I remember the date clearly because it was just a week after the moon landing, which everyone was still talking about. I was driving home really late, around 2:35 in the morning. I worked the late shift back then, and the drive home along DK Road near Copalis Beach in Grays Harbor County was usually peaceful. It's a winding road through dense forest, and I'd driven it hundreds of times without incident. The night was unusually dark. No moon, just a blanket of stars overhead when the trees opened up enough to see them. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating maybe 20 feet of road ahead. I had the radio on low, some late-night DJ playing mellower tunes for the overnight crowd. I was tired, but alert enough. Had to be on these roads, especially that late. As I rounded a bend, one I knew well, about 7 miles from my turnoff, something made me slam on my brakes. I'm not talking about a gentle slowdown. I mean, I absolutely stomped that brake pedal with everything I had. My tires screeched and the car fishtailed slightly before coming to a stop. There, caught in my headlights, was something I couldn't immediately process. It was standing right in the middle of the road, completely still, just staring at my car. My first thought was bear, but that didn't make sense. This thing was standing upright, perfectly balanced on 2 legs, and it was huge. I mean, absolutely massive. I sat there for what felt like forever, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, just staring at this creature. It must have been at least 8 feet tall, not a bear, not a man in a costume, something else entirely. I've been a hunter all my life. I know every animal in these woods. This wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. After the initial shock wore off, I did something that, looking back now, was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I reached for the spotlight I kept in my glove compartment and my pistol from under the seat. I always carried protection when driving these remote roads at night, usually for cougars or aggressive elk, not whatever this was. Heart pounding in my ears, I slowly opened my car door. The dome light came on, and for a split second I thought the creature would bolt, but it didn't. It just stood there watching me. I stepped out, my pistol gripped tightly in my right hand, spotlight in my left. When I flicked on that spotlight and aimed it directly at the creature, that's when I got my first real good look at it. The sight is burned into my memory. It was covered in dark brown hair, not fur but hair, all over its body. The hair on its head was longer, maybe 5 to 7 inches, almost like a mane. But its face, God, its face. It was almost human-like, but black in color, with deep-set eyes that reflected my spotlight with an eerie, yellowish glow. What struck me most was how it was built. This thing had proportions similar to a human, but everything was just bigger, broader shoulders, thicker limbs. Its hands had distinct fingers, not claws or paws, actual fingers like yours or mine, just larger. And when it turned slightly, I noticed its buttocks were shaped like a human's too. Not like any animal I'd ever encountered. I'm not sure how long we stood there staring at each other. Maybe 10 seconds, maybe 30. Time gets funny in moments like that. I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My brain kept cycling through possibilities. Bear, man in a suit, some kind of elaborate prank. But none of them stuck. Based on my experience with estimating weights of deer and elk, I'd put this creature at around 300 pounds, maybe more. It had muscle definition visible even through the hair covering its body. This wasn't some skinny, gangly thing. It was solid. Then something changed. Maybe it was the extended exposure to the spotlight, or maybe it was something else, but the creature suddenly seemed to make a decision. It turned, not in a panicked way, but deliberately, and ran off the road into the woods. Its movement was fluid, almost graceful for something so large. It didn't lumber like a bear or bound like a deer. It ran upright like a human athlete, disappearing into the tree line before I could even think to follow. The sound it made moving through the underbrush was substantial, breaking branches, rustling leaves, but there was no vocalization, no roar, no scream, nothing like that. Just the sound of something big moving quickly through dense forest. I stood there for a while, spotlight still aimed at the spot where it had disappeared, my pistol now hanging uselessly at my side. I was shaking, not just from fear, but from adrenaline, confusion, and the sudden cold that seemed to envelop me despite the mild summer night. Eventually, I got back in my car. I sat there for a long time, engine running, heater on, even though it wasn't cold. I felt numb. What do you do after something like that? Call the police? Tell them what? That I saw some giant hairy humanoid on DK Road? They'd think I was drunk or crazy or both. I drove home slowly, checking my mirrors constantly, half expecting to see the creature following me or waiting around the next bend. Every shadow in my headlights looked like a potential threat. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat in my living room with all the lights on, replaying the encounter over and over in my mind. The next morning, after the sun was fully up, I went back. I had to know if there was any evidence, anything to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. I parked my car near where the encounter had happened and started searching the area. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There, in a muddy patch just off the road, were footprints. Not bear tracks, not human footprints, but something in between. They were huge. I measured them with the tape measure I keep in my truck, 18 inches long and 7 inches wide. The stride length between prints was massive, well over 3 feet apart. The prints showed 5 toes, similar to a human foot but wider and with a different distribution of weight. They led into the woods, exactly where I'd seen the creature disappear. I followed them for about 50 yards before they vanished into harder ground, covered with pine needles and leaf litter. As I was examining the tracks, something else caught my attention. There was a strange, musky odor in the area, not like anything I'd smelled before. Not the rotting smell of a carcass or the marking scent of a bear, but something distinctly different, pungent, but not entirely unpleasant, like wet dog mixed with something else I couldn't place. Looking at those tracks, smelling that distinctive odor, I knew I hadn't imagined it. Something had been there, something real, based on everything I observed, the build of the body, the proportions, certain anatomical details. I'm convinced the creature I saw was female. There was a certain shape to the chest and hips that suggested it. I know that sounds strange to be noticing in such a bizarre situation, but when you spend your life observing wildlife, you pick up on these details automatically. I've never told many people about this. My wife knows, and a couple close friends, but that's it. Who would believe me? Even with the footprint evidence, most people would just assume I was making it up or had seen a bear in poor lighting conditions. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit. It was something else, something that isn't supposed to exist according to science, but was standing right there in front of me on DK Road. In the years since, I've read accounts from others who've had similar encounters in the Pacific Northwest. Some details match up perfectly with what I experienced. The height, the hair coloration, the humanoid features. It makes me wonder how many other people have seen these creatures, but never reported it for fear of ridicule. I still drive that road sometimes. Not late at night anymore. I've made sure to adjust my schedule over the years, and every time I round that particular bend, my foot hovers over the brake pedal and my eyes scan the tree line. I've never seen it again, but I feel something watching sometimes. Maybe it's just my imagination playing tricks, the memory of that night making me paranoid, or maybe it's really out there, watching and waiting. I don't know if what I saw was what people call Bigfoot or Sasquatch or some undiscovered species of primate. I just know what I saw, what I smelled, and what I measured in those footprints the next day. It was real, it was intelligent, and for one brief moment, our paths crossed on a dark road in Washington. That moment changed everything I thought I knew about the world around us and what might be hiding just beyond the reach of our headlights. Story 5. I still can't fully explain what I saw that day at Dinosaur National Monument. It's been over 30 years, July 2nd, 1991 to be exact. But I remember it like it was yesterday. The memory is burned into my brain, and I keep turning it over, trying to make sense of it. I've never told many people about this because, well, who'd believe me? But I need to get this out. I was 27 then, an avid hiker with a decent amount of backcountry experience. I'd been planning this solo trip for months, a week, exploring the more remote sections of the monument. If you've never been there, Dinosaur National Monument straddles the border between Colorado and Utah. Most tourists stick to the visitor center and the famous dinosaur quarry, but the place is massive, over 200,000 acres of some of the most rugged wilderness you can imagine. The weather that day was clear but hot. Must have been in the mid-90s. I'd started hiking around 7 in the morning to beat the worst of the heat. By early afternoon, I was deep into one of the more isolated areas, probably 8 miles from the nearest road. This part of the monument is no joke. Deep canyons cut by the Green River, broken rock everywhere, steep drop-offs that appear out of nowhere. The vegetation doesn't help either. Thick stands of pinyon pine and juniper that you have to push through, scraping your arms and catching your pack. I'd been hiking for about 5 hours and decided to take a lunch break on this rocky outcropping that offered an amazing view of one of the canyons. The silence out there was incredible. That deep, complete silence you only get in really remote places. No planes overhead, no distant traffic, just the occasional bird call and the light whisper of wind through the junipers. I was just finishing my sandwich when I heard it, the sound of rocks falling somewhere below me. Not unusual in itself. Rocks tumble down those slopes all the time from natural erosion. I didn't think much of it until I heard it again, but this time it sounded different, more deliberate somehow, like something was causing it. My first thought was bighorn sheep. They're common in the monument and incredibly agile on those steep slopes, or maybe a mule deer. But something felt off about the pattern of movement. It wasn't the steady, confident movement of an animal that belongs in that terrain. I packed up my stuff and moved closer to the edge of the cliff to investigate. The drop-off was probably 100 feet or so, with a series of narrow ledges and broken slopes below. I stayed well back from the edge. I'm not stupid, but I wanted to see if I could spot whatever was making the noise. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards away, moving along one of the narrow ledges near the cliff edge, was something. At first I thought it was a person, but immediately realized that couldn't be right. No hiker would be crazy enough to be out on that ledge, and the way it moved was just wrong. It wasn't walking upright like a person would, it was kind of crawling or scrabbling along the edge, using both arms and legs. The movements were fluid, though, not desperate or struggling like you'd expect from someone in a dangerous spot. It moved like it knew exactly what it was doing, like it belonged there. I froze, just watching. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't have binoculars, which I've kicked myself for 1,000 times since, but even from that distance, I could tell several things. It was big, way bigger than a person. The proportions were all wrong for a human. The arms seemed too long, the torso too bulky. The color was hard to determine in the harsh sunlight, but it seemed to be a dark brown, or maybe reddish brown, and it was covered in something. Not clothes, hair or fur, I think. I must have shifted my weight or made some noise, because suddenly the thing stopped moving. It went completely still for maybe 3 seconds. Then its head turned. I swear it turned directly toward me, and in one quick motion, it retreated from the open cliff edge into the cover of the junipers and pinyon pines. The speed was incredible. 1 second it was there, the next it was crashing through the vegetation. I could hear branches snapping, loose rocks cascading down the slope, the whole works. It made way more noise moving through the brush than it had on the exposed ledge. I stood there, completely frozen, for I don't know how long. Minutes, maybe. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just seen. Every rational explanation I came up with fell short. It wasn't a bear. The movement was all wrong, and bears aren't that agile on steep terrain. It wasn't a person. Too big, wrong proportions, moving wrong. Mountain lion, no way. The size alone ruled that out. After the initial shock wore off, curiosity kicked in. I'm not saying it was smart, but I decided to try to get a better look. I started making my way carefully along the cliff edge in the direction where the thing had disappeared. I kept well away from the drop-off, sticking to the more stable ground. As I moved, I kept hearing intermittent sounds from below and ahead of me, more falling rocks, vegetation rustling, branches breaking, then silence, then more movement. It was like whatever it was would move, then stop and listen, then move again. I found a spot where I could see a bit better down the slope and just waited, hoping it would show itself again. The minutes ticked by, the sounds continued, but they were getting farther away. It was moving parallel to the cliff edge, staying in the cover of the trees and brush. Then, about 15 minutes after I first spotted it, I heard a different sound. It's hard to describe, kind of a low, guttural sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a grunt. It was brief, just once, but loud enough to carry. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. That sound, it wasn't anything I recognized from any animal I know, and it definitely wasn't human. I stayed there for another half hour or so, but the sounds grew more distant and eventually stopped completely. Whatever it was had moved on, or maybe it was just being very still and quiet. Looking back, I'm amazed at how calm I remained in the moment. It wasn't until later, when I was setting up camp for the night about 2 miles from that spot, and yes, I know it was stupid to stay out there, but hiking out would have meant traveling in the dark, which seemed even more dangerous, that the fear really hit me. I barely slept that night. Every sound outside my tent had me wide awake, heart racing. I kept imagining that thing finding my camp, looming over my tent in the darkness. When morning finally came, I packed up quickly and hiked out, taking a different route than I'd planned. I've gone back and forth about what I saw that day. In the years since, I've read about other people's experiences with what they call Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Some of the descriptions match what I saw. The size, the movement, the behavior of retreating quickly when spotted. But here's the thing, I never got a clear look at its face. I can't tell you if it had a prominent brow ridge or a flat nose or any of the features people typically describe. What stuck with me was the overall impression, something more ape-like than human, but moving with a purpose and intelligence that seemed beyond normal animal behavior. The way it navigated that treacherous terrain was remarkable. Those cliff edges and broken slopes would be challenging for an experienced hiker with proper gear. Whatever I saw was moving across them with a confidence and agility that was honestly impressive. I've hiked a lot of backcountry over the years, and I've seen plenty of wildlife, bears, mountain lions, all kinds of animals. Nothing moves like that thing did. Nothing has that combination of size, agility, and what I can only describe as deliberateness. One detail that keeps coming back to me is how it reacted when it sensed my presence. It didn't panic like a deer or charge like a bear might. It made a calculated retreat, quickly but not frantically, seeking cover and then continuing to move away while staying concealed. That suggests intelligence, awareness. I've gone back to Dinosaur National Monument several times since then, though never again to that specific area. Each time, I find myself scanning the cliff edges and the thick stands of trees, wondering if I'll see it again. Part of me hopes I do, with a camera ready this time. Part of me hopes I never encounter whatever it was again. The rational part of my brain tries to explain it away. Maybe it was just a particularly large hiker off trail. Maybe the distance and lighting played tricks on my eyes. Maybe it was some kind of known animal behaving strangely. But deep down, I know what I saw wasn't any of those things. The National Park Service keeps records of unusual sightings, but I never reported mine. What would I say? That I saw something big and hairy crawling along a cliff edge, that it moved like nothing I've ever seen before, that it made a sound that still echoes in my nightmares sometimes. They'd think I was crazy, or that I'd been out in the sun too long. So I've kept this to myself mostly. A few close friends know, my wife knows, though she gives me that look whenever I bring it up, the one that says, "I believe that you believe it." I don't blame people for being skeptical. If someone told me this story, I'd probably be skeptical too. But I know what I saw. The most frustrating thing is not having answers. Was it some unknown species living in those remote canyons? Was it the same thing other people have encountered and called Bigfoot? Is there a whole population of these creatures out there, or was this some lone individual? I'll probably never know. All I have is that one brief encounter, maybe 2 minutes total, of actually seeing the thing, and the lingering questions it left behind. Sometimes I wonder if it saw me as clearly as I saw it, if it went back to wherever it lives and told others of its kind about the strange human it encountered on the cliff edge that hot July day. If it lies awake at night too, wondering about me. Story 6. I still don't know what we saw that weekend. It's been 3 months and I've barely slept through the night since. I keep telling myself there has to be a logical explanation, but I can't find one that makes sense. Maybe writing this all down will help me process it or find someone who's experienced something similar. It was the second weekend in October. I'd been planning this camping trip with my two closest friends for months, our annual escape from work stress and city life. We picked a remote spot near Morrison Lake, about 4 hours from home. The area is beautiful this time of year. Trees turning golden and red, weather cool, but not freezing yet. Perfect camping conditions. We arrived at the campsite around 2 in the afternoon. It was more secluded than we expected. The ranger station was closed for the season, and we hadn't seen another vehicle for the last 40 minutes of driving. The campground had maybe 15 designated spots, but we were completely alone out there. I guess everyone else had better things to do, I remember joking as we unloaded our gear. We picked a spot furthest from the entrance, backing up against a thick section of forest with a small clearing for our tents. The lake was visible through the trees, maybe a quarter mile away, and we knew there was a dam with an observation tower on the far side. Somewhere we planned to hike to the next day. We spent the afternoon setting up camp, gathering firewood, and just relaxing. Everything was normal, peaceful even. We grilled burgers for dinner, drank a few beers, and were sitting around the fire swapping stories as the sun went down. That's when things started to feel different. It was subtle at first. The forest just got unnaturally quiet. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that's never a good sign. No birds, no insects chirping, nothing. Both my friends noticed it too. We all kind of looked at each other, wondering if someone else would say something first. Anyone else notice how quiet it just got? One of my friends finally asked. I nodded, feeling a strange prickle along my neck. Something felt off, but I couldn't place it. We decided it was probably just the temperature dropping as night fell, making the wildlife less active. A perfectly reasonable explanation, right? Around 10 o'clock, I got up to grab another beer from the cooler when I heard it. A crack of branches from the woods behind our tents. Not the sound of a squirrel or even a deer. This was heavy, deliberate. You guys hear that? I asked, freezing halfway to the cooler. They both nodded, eyes suddenly alert. We listened for a moment, and when nothing else happened, we tried to laugh it off. Probably just a raccoon or something, my friend said, but his voice had an edge to it. We went back to our conversation, but I noticed we were all speaking quieter now, all of us occasionally glancing toward the dark tree line. About 15 minutes later, we heard it again, a heavy footstep, followed by the sound of something large moving through the underbrush. This time from a different direction, more to our right. That's no raccoon, my other friend whispered. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the noise, but the beam couldn't penetrate far into the thick trees. All we could see were the first few feet of forest, then darkness. The three of us huddled closer to the fire, speaking in hushed tones about what it could be. A bear made the most sense, but bears aren't exactly stealthy. They crash through the woods, snap branches, and generally make a racket. This was different, heavy but deliberate, like whatever it was didn't want to be seen, but wasn't exactly trying to be silent either. For the next hour, we heard it circling our campsite, never in the same spot twice. Sometimes it would stay quiet for 10 or 15 minutes, and we'd start to relax, thinking it had left. Then we'd hear a heavy footfall from a completely different direction. It was like it was studying us, watching our reactions. Should we pack up and leave? One friend suggested, clearly unnerved. In the dark? With that thing out there? No way, replied the other. I agreed. The idea of fumbling around in the dark, trying to pack up while something stalked us from the trees, seemed like a terrible plan. We decided to wait it out, keep the fire going strong, and take turns staying awake. None of us slept much that night. Every time I'd start to drift off in my tent, I'd hear another crack of branches or the sound of heavy breathing just beyond the campsite perimeter. My friends reported the same thing when we discussed it over coffee the next morning. The strange thing was, whatever it was never actually entered our campsite or showed itself. It just watched. Morning light didn't reveal much. No clear tracks, just some disturbed underbrush and a few broken branches higher up than a deer could reach. We were all exhausted and on edge, but decided to stick to our plans. We figured whatever it was would be gone during daylight, and the hike to the observation tower would be a good distraction. After breakfast, we packed day packs with water, snacks, and a first aid kit. The map showed the dam was about 2 miles from our campsite, an easy hike along the lake and then up a service road. The weather was perfect, cool, sunny, with a light breeze rippling across the lake's surface. For the first time since the previous night, I started to relax. The forest was alive again with bird calls and the rustle of small animals. Whatever had circled our camp was gone, or at least that's what I told myself. We reached the base of the dam around 11 in the morning. It wasn't huge, maybe 70 feet high, with a narrow 2-lane road running across the top. The observation tower was visible at the far end, a simple metal structure rising another 20 feet above the dam. "Race you to the top," one of my friends called out, already starting up the paved access road that zigzagged to the dam's crest. "You guys go ahead," I said. "I'm going to take it slow." I was still tired from the sleepless night and wanted to enjoy the view of the lake stretching out below us. They jogged ahead while I maintained a steady pace, about 50 yards behind them. The road curved gently back and forth as it climbed. When I reached the final switchback before the dam's top, I paused to catch my breath and take a photo of the valley. That's when I noticed it. At first I thought it was just a shadow on the guardrail beside the road up ahead, where the pavement leveled out onto the top of the dam. But as my eyes focused, I realized it was something solid, something moving. My blood turned to ice as I realized I was looking at a figure perched on the guardrail, a massive hair-covered form crouched there like it was watching my friends who had already reached the top and were walking toward the observation tower, their backs to it. I blinked hard, convinced my exhausted mind was playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, it was still there. The creature was at least 7 feet tall, even in its hunched position, covered completely in dark brown or black hair. It had broad shoulders, a powerful build, and a distinctly non-human silhouette. I couldn't see its face clearly. It was partly turned away from me. But what struck me most was how perfectly still it remained. It wasn't fidgeting or shifting like a person would. It was completely motionless, except for the slight movement of its head as it tracked my friends. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty this was what had been circling our camp the night before. The sheer size and mass matched the heavy footsteps we'd heard. And now it was here, in broad daylight, watching us. My throat closed up. I wanted to shout a warning to my friends, but couldn't make a sound. My legs felt rooted to the spot. Part of me didn't want to alert the creature that I'd seen it, and another part was simply paralyzed with fear. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, my survival instincts kicked in. I slowly, quietly took a single step backward, then another. The creature's head suddenly swiveled in my direction. I couldn't make out its features clearly in the midday sun, but I felt its gaze lock onto mine. That connection, that moment of recognition, sent a wave of primal terror through me unlike anything I've ever experienced. It wasn't just fear. It was the sudden, overwhelming certainty that I was in the presence of something that shouldn't exist, something that defied my understanding of the world. I broke eye contact and turned, trying not to run, but walking as fast as I could back down the access road. Every instinct screamed at me to sprint, but some deeper wisdom held me back. Don't trigger the chase response. Don't run like prey. When I rounded the first switchback, putting the creature out of my sight, I called out to my friends as loudly as I could without screaming, "Guys, we need to go back! Now!" They turned at the observation tower, confused and irritated at first. I must have looked terrified because their expressions quickly changed to concern. They started jogging back toward me. "What's wrong?" one called out. I didn't answer, just frantically waved them toward me, my eyes darting back to where I'd seen the creature. It was no longer visible on the guardrail. My heart hammered against my ribs. When my friends reached me, I grabbed their arms and started pulling them down the road. "We need to leave. Right now," I said, my voice shaking. "There's something up there, the same thing from last night." They looked back up toward the dam, seeing nothing unusual. "What are you talking about? What did you see?" one asked. "Not here," I hissed. "Keep moving." We hurried down the access road, my friends throwing confused glances back over their shoulders. When we were about halfway down, one of them suddenly grabbed my shoulder, stopping me. "Holy shit," he whispered, his face draining of color. "There's something following us." I refused to look back, just pulled their arms harder. "I know, don't run. Just keep moving steadily." As we continued down, they told me what they were seeing. A large, dark figure moving parallel to us, just inside the tree line that bordered the access road. It was keeping pace with us, but staying just far enough in the shadows that they couldn't make out details. They described it exactly as I had seen it. Tall, powerful, covered in dark hair. "It was watching you when you were coming back down to us," my friend said, voice tight with fear. "Standing just behind the tree line, following right behind you. We made it back to camp in record time, threw our gear into the car haphazardly, and were driving away within 20 minutes. Nobody spoke much as we sped down the forest road. What was there to say? We'd all experienced something we couldn't explain. We've tried to rationalize it since then. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs. Maybe it was an elaborate prank by some locals. Maybe the lack of sleep had us all hallucinating the same thing, but none of those explanations feel right. Whatever was watching us from the guardrail of that dam was no bear. Its proportions were wrong. The way it moved was wrong. The intelligence behind its behavior, circling our camp, staying just out of sight, then appearing in broad daylight like it was studying us. None of that fits with any animal I know. I haven't been camping since. My friends and I don't talk about it much, but I know they're just as shaken as I am. Sometimes I'll catch one of them staring off into space with this haunted look, and I know exactly what they're thinking about. I still don't have any answers, just the memory of those eyes meeting mine, and the bone-deep certainty that whatever I saw that day was aware of me in a way that no animal should be. Story 7. I've never been the type to make stuff up for attention. I'm not looking for anyone to believe me. Hell, I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. But I need to put this down somewhere, and maybe someone else out there has seen what I saw. This happened 3 years ago, during tornado season in Kansas, where I've lived my entire life. Born and raised on the same plot of land my grandfather farmed, I know every inch of my property and the surrounding area. I know what belongs here and what doesn't. That day started like any other spring day in Kansas when storms are brewing. The weather had been unstable all week, typical for April in our part of the country. The forecast called for severe thunderstorms with the possibility of tornadoes by evening, but that's just life here. When you've spent 47 years in Tornado Alley, you develop a certain relationship with the sky. You learn to read it, respect it, and prepare for its moods. Around 4 in the afternoon, I stepped outside to do my pre-storm routine. The air felt heavy, almost soupy with humidity. That electric feeling was there, the kind that makes the hair on your arms stand up. The sky was doing that thing where dark clouds roll in, then break apart to let sunlight stream through in patches, creating this weird contrast of light and shadow across the fields. The wind was gusting unpredictably, sometimes dying completely before suddenly whipping up enough to bend the tops of the trees. I needed to secure anything that could become a projectile in high winds. Lawn chairs, tools, that sort of thing. I also wanted to check on the outbuildings and make sure nothing would flood if we got the heavy rain they were predicting. Just the usual storm prep. My property backs up to about 30 acres of woods with fields on either side. The tree line serves as a natural boundary between my land and my neighbor's soybean field to the east. I was walking the perimeter, just making mental notes about some fence posts that needed replacing, when something caught my attention from the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was a deer. We get plenty of those around here, and they often move more in advance of storms, but something felt off about the movement. It wasn't the stop-start motion of a deer. It was more deliberate. I stopped and turned to look directly at the tree line, about 200 yards away from where I was standing. That's when I saw it clear as day. Stepping out from the tree line was a figure, not a person, not any animal I'd ever seen before. It was tall, much taller than a man, probably 7 feet at minimum. The entire body was covered in dark, almost black hair or fur that looked matted in some places. It wasn't thin hair either. This was thick, like a winter coat on a bear, but covering its entire body. The thing that struck me most was how it moved. I've been a hunter all my life. I've seen every animal native to Kansas in motion. This wasn't like anything else. It was bipedal, walking on 2 legs just like a human, but with a slight forward lean. Its arms were disproportionately long, hanging down past what would be its knees if it was human. Those arms swung with purpose as it moved, not just dangling there. I froze completely. It hadn't seen me yet, and I was downwind. The creature stepped fully out of the tree line and paused, looking across the open field to another patch of woods about 100 yards away. Then, without warning, it began to run. The speed was astonishing. I've seen Olympic sprinters on TV, and this thing would have left them in the dust. It crossed that 100-yard stretch in what seemed like seconds, moving with this fluid, powerful stride that didn't waste any energy. It wasn't clumsy or awkward like you might expect something that big to be. It was efficient, almost graceful in a primal way. As it ran, I could see its muscles working beneath that dark hair. This wasn't some scrawny thing. It was solid, powerful, its legs pumped with incredible strength, eating up ground with each stride. The way it held its upper body, slightly pitched forward but balanced perfectly, it was like watching something that had evolved specifically to run like that. I remember thinking, clear as a bell, that is not a man in a suit. The movements were too natural, too fluid. There was no hesitation in its gait, no adjustment of costume parts. This was a living, breathing creature moving exactly how it was meant to move. The sky darkened momentarily as clouds passed over the sun, and when the light shifted again, the creature had reached the other patch of woods and disappeared into the trees. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 30 seconds, but it's burned into my memory with perfect clarity. I stood there for I don't know how long, trying to process what I'd just seen. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wasn't scared exactly, more shocked, like my brain couldn't categorize what my eyes had just witnessed. I've lived in rural Kansas my entire life. I know what's supposed to be here and what isn't, and that thing was definitely not supposed to be here. The wind picked up suddenly, snapping me back to reality. A strong gust nearly knocked me sideways, and I looked up to see the western sky had turned that greenish-black color that every Kansan knows means business. The storm was coming in faster than predicted. I hurried back to the house, constantly glancing over my shoulder at the tree line where I'd seen the creature emerge. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Could it have been a bear standing on its hind legs? No way. We rarely get bears here, and none move like that. A person in some kind of ghillie suit or costume, the height and proportions were all wrong, and nobody could run that fast in a bulky suit. By the time I got back to the house, the wind was really howling. I secured the last few items on my porch and went inside, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I kept going back to the window, staring out at the tree line, half expecting to see the creature again. Around 6 that evening, the tornado siren started wailing. The TV was showing radar images of a severe thunderstorm with rotation, headed straight for our area. I grabbed my emergency kit and headed down to the basement, but my mind wasn't on the storm. I kept replaying those moments in my head, seeing that creature's powerful stride as it crossed the field. The storm hit with a vengeance. The house creaked and groaned above me as wind battered the walls. Hail pounded the roof like someone dropping handfuls of marbles. The rain came down in sheets so thick you couldn't see 10 feet outside the window. For almost 2 hours, the storm raged, with several tornado warnings issued for our county. Sitting there in my basement with only the weather radio for company, I couldn't help but wonder if the creature had somehow sensed what was coming, the way it had moved with such purpose, almost like it was evacuating to safer ground. Had it known about the approaching storm? Many animals can sense pressure changes before humans can detect them. Was this thing, whatever it was, responding to some primal instinct to seek shelter? The storm finally passed around 8 in the evening. The tornado had touched down about 5 miles north of my property, tearing up some farmland, but thankfully missing any homes. My place had survived with just some minor wind damage. A few shingles torn off, one broken window, nothing serious. I barely slept that night. Every sound from outside had me on edge. Was it out there? Had it returned after the storm? I kept replaying the image of it running across that field, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The next morning broke clear and cool, that pristine feeling you often get after a big storm. I was outside at first light, ostensibly checking for damage, but really looking for any sign of the creature. I walked to the spot where I'd been standing the day before, then made my way across to the tree line where I'd seen it emerge. The ground told me nothing. The storm had dumped over 4 inches of rain in just a couple of hours, washing away any tracks that might have been there. The field between the 2 patches of woods was just a muddy expanse now, with no hint that anything unusual had crossed it the day before. I spent hours combing through both wooded areas, looking for broken branches, tufts of hair. Anything that might confirm what I'd seen wasn't just my imagination. I found nothing conclusive, just the usual post-storm debris. For weeks afterward, I went back to that spot every day, hoping for another glimpse or some kind of evidence. I set up a trail camera facing that field, but it never captured anything out of the ordinary. Whatever I saw that day, it didn't come back. Or if it did, it was smart enough to avoid my camera. I've never told many people about this. My closest friend thinks I saw a bear, despite the fact that black bears are rare in our area and don't run on 2 legs for 100 yards. My brother suggested stress, and the weird storm light played tricks on my eyes. Maybe they're right. Maybe there's a logical explanation. But 3 years later, I still see it in my dreams. That powerful, fluid movement, that impossible speed, that sense of witnessing something that shouldn't exist in the world, as I understand it. I've researched cryptid sightings since then and found reports of similar creatures from all over North America. Some call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I don't know what name to give it. I just know what I saw. Every spring when tornado season comes around, I find myself watching the tree line more carefully. Part of me hopes I'll see it again, just to confirm I'm not crazy. Another part hopes I never do, because if that thing is real, truly real, then what else might be out there that we don't know about? E.T. Story 8? I've never told this story to anyone outside of the people who were there that night in September 1993. It's been almost 30 years, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Some nights I still wake up in a cold sweat, thinking about what we saw. I was 19 at the time, staying at a cabin retreat near Nordegg, Alberta, with a bunch of friends. It was this beautiful wooded area with a few rustic cabins scattered around. Must have been about 14 or 15 of us there that weekend, though a few more joined later, bringing our group to around 20. We were all around the same age, just hanging out, enjoying the last bits of decent weather before fall really kicked in. On our second night there, someone mentioned an old cemetery not far from the cabins. You know how it is when you're young. Anything creepy or mysterious becomes instantly appealing. So we decided to check it out after dinner. It was about 7 in the evening when we set out. The sun was just starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees, but there was still plenty of light. We brought flashlights anyway, figuring we'd need them on the way back. We headed down this steep hill past the boys' cabin, walking in a loose group, laughing and joking around. At the bottom of the hill, we came across some old railroad tracks that cut through the woods. They didn't look like they'd been used in years, weeds growing between the ties, rust forming on the rails. Someone said if we turned left and followed them for about half a mile, we'd find the cemetery. The walk along the tracks was actually really peaceful. The trees lined both sides, and as the daylight started to fade, the whole place took on this golden orange glow. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, despite the slight chill in the air that made me zip my jacket up to my chin. When we reached the cemetery, it wasn't what I'd pictured at all. I was expecting something straight out of a horror movie. Tall, wrought-iron gates, crumbling headstones, the works. Instead, it was just this small, overgrown plot of land with maybe 30 or 40 graves. Most of the headstones were simple, some so weathered you could barely read the inscriptions. A few of us had brought small flashlights, and we used them to examine the dates on the graves. Some went back to the late 1800s, while the newest ones were from the 1950s or thereabouts. We spent about an hour there, walking between the graves, reading the inscriptions, wondering about the lives of the people buried there. Some of the guys tried to spook the girls with ghost stories, but it all felt pretty harmless. Just a bunch of kids having fun, nothing weird or threatening about it. By the time we decided to head back, the sun had fully set. Now we really needed those flashlights. The forest had transformed from peaceful to slightly intimidating. You know how woods get at night. Every shadow seems deeper, every sound more significant. But we weren't scared, just a bit more alert than before. We made our way back to the railroad tracks and started following them toward the cabins. Our flashlights bobbed in the darkness, lighting up small patches of ground in front of us. We were walking in a tighter group now, nobody wanting to straggle behind. That's when it happened. One of the girls, I think her name was Melissa, suddenly let out this blood-curdling scream. It wasn't one of those playful screams when someone jumps out to scare you. This was raw, primal fear. We all spun around, hearts racing. Melissa's flashlight beam was pointed off to the side of the tracks, illuminating what looked like an old fire tower. I hadn't even noticed it on our way to the cemetery. It must have been 50 feet tall, this wooden structure rising up from the trees like a skeleton. What? What is it? Someone asked. But then we all fell silent as more flashlights joined Melissa's, pointing at the tower. There, at the very top of the tower, was something. Even now I struggle to describe it accurately. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. The build was all wrong for a human, too broad, too powerful looking. In the intersecting beams of our flashlights, I could make out dark, matted fur covering its entire body. For a few seconds, we all just stood there, frozen in disbelief. The thing was looking right at us. I could feel it. There were no glowing eyes reflecting back our flashlights like you'd get with a bear or another animal. Just this dark, hulking silhouette against the night sky. Then it moved. God, the way it moved. It didn't climb down or show any hesitation about being 50 feet up in the air. It just jumped, raised its arms slightly and stepped off the platform like it was nothing, like it was stepping off a curb. As it raised its arms, I saw long hair hanging from its limbs, swaying slightly in the breeze. The movement was so casual, so effortless, that my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It hit the ground with a thud that I felt more than heard, a heavy impact that seemed to vibrate through the earth beneath my feet. There was no cry of pain, no sign that the fall had injured it in any way. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that whatever we were looking at wasn't human. For one heart-stopping moment, it stood there at the base of the tower, its massive silhouette perfectly visible in our flashlight beams. Then it turned and bolted into the dense underbrush beside the tracks. The sound of its escape was terrifying. Branches snapping, small trees actually breaking as it plowed through them. I'd been camping and hiking my whole life, and I'd never heard anything move through forest like that. Not a bear, not a moose, nothing. Then silence. Complete and utter silence. The forest went dead quiet, like every living thing was holding its breath. We stood there, paralyzed, our flashlights still pointed where the creature had disappeared. Nobody spoke. I don't think anyone knew what to say. My own heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. About a minute passed, 60 seconds that felt like an eternity. And then we heard it. A scream that came from somewhere deep in the woods. Not a human scream, nothing like the sound Melissa had made. This was high-pitched but powerful, like a cross between a woman's scream and an elk bugle. But wrong. Distorted. It started low and then rose in pitch until it seemed to pierce right through me. The sound lingered in the air for several seconds, echoing slightly before fading away. I remember feeling the hair on my arms stand straight up. It wasn't just the scream itself. It was the emotion behind it. It wasn't pain or fear. It was, I don't know, like a warning maybe, or a challenge. Whatever it was, it felt intelligent, purposeful. As the echo of the scream died away, I noticed something else. A smell. It hadn't been there before, but now it hung in the air around us, heavy and distinct. The best way I can describe it is like wet dog, mixed with something rotten and musky. It was so strong it made my eyes water. "Run," someone whispered. And just like that, the spell was broken. We ran. All of us, at the same time, no discussion needed. We sprinted along those railroad tracks like our lives depended on it, flashlight beams bouncing wildly, nobody daring to look back. I remember the sound of our feet on the wooden ties, our panicked breathing, someone sobbing as they ran. I don't know how long it took us to reach the hill leading up to the cabins. Time seemed distorted, but when we finally scrambled up that slope, lungs burning, legs aching, not one of us stopped until we were safely inside the main cabin with the door locked behind us. We collapsed in the common room, gasping for breath, looking at each other with wide eyes. Nobody wanted to be the first to say it, to name what we'd seen. It was Colin, one of the older guys, who finally broke the silence. Did we all just see that? His voice was shaky, uncertain. We all nodded, still too out of breath to speak. That was a... Someone started, then stopped. Bigfoot, another person finished. The word hung in the air, absurd, and yet there was no other explanation that fit. Once we'd calmed down a bit, we noticed something in the main cabin we hadn't paid attention to before. On one wall, there was a corkboard with newspaper clippings and old photographs. Most were just local history stuff. The founding of Nordegg, mining operations, that kind of thing. But in the corner were half a dozen yellowed newspaper articles with headlines like "Strange Creature Sighted Near Nordegg" and "Hunter Claims Encounter with Unknown Beast." There were even a couple of blurry photographs that, while inconclusive, showed dark shapes in the forest that didn't look quite right. The dates on these articles ranged from the 1950s to the late 1980s. According to them, whatever we saw that night had been in those woods for decades. We didn't sleep much that night. We kept all the lights on, jumped at every creak and groan of the old cabin. A few people wanted to leave immediately, but it was the middle of the night, and honestly, the thought of going back out there in the dark was worse than staying put. I keep thinking about how it jumped from that tower. That's the detail I can't get past. Even after all these years, no living creature I know of could fall from that height without injury. and the way it moved through the forest afterward, breaking trees, not just branches, actual trees, spoke to a strength that was beyond human. We left the next morning as soon as it was light. Nobody suggested finishing our planned weekend stay. Nobody wanted to go back to those railroad tracks or that cemetery. We piled into our cars and drove away, most of us never to return to Nordegg again. I've tried researching what we saw over the years. I've read about Sasquatch sightings and compared notes with other accounts. Many details match. The height, the fur, the smell, even the scream. But I've never found another report mentioning one jumping from such a height with such ease. Sometimes I wonder if we really saw what I think we saw. Memory can play tricks, especially when you're scared. But then I remember there were 14 to 20 of us there that night. We all saw the same thing. We all heard that scream. We all smelled that smell. Whatever was in those woods near Nordegg in 1993 wasn't human. And sometimes on dark nights when I can't sleep, I wonder if it's still there, climbing that old fire tower, watching the railroad tracks, waiting for the next group of curious visitors to wander too far from safety. Story 9. I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about what happened to me that morning in the Ouachita National Forest, November 12th, 2016. The dates burned into my brain like a cattle brand. I'm 53 years old and have been hunting these Arkansas woods since I was a teenager. My daddy taught me to track deer through these ridges, and I've bagged more than my fair share over the decades. I know every hollow, every game trail, and every seasonal deer pattern in this part of the forest. Or at least I thought I did. It was the second week of rifle season. I'd been out twice already that week without any luck. Just a couple of doe sightings, nothing worth taking a shot at. That Saturday morning I decided to hike out to a remote hollow I hadn't visited yet this season. There's this perfect saddle between two ridges where deer funnel through, especially in the early morning. It's about a 3-mile hike from the nearest access road, which keeps most hunters away, their loss usually. I woke up at 3:30 that morning, wolfed down some instant oatmeal, and downed a thermos of black coffee. By 4:15 I was parking my truck at the trailhead, double-checking my gear by headlamp. I had my trusty .30-06 Remington, the same rifle I'd used for the past 15 years, plus extra ammo, my hunting knife, some trail mix, water, and a couple sandwiches for later, standard stuff. It was cold as hell that morning, maybe 35 degrees with a damp chill that cut right through my camo and base layers. The sky was clear though, stars shining like ice chips overhead. The forecast had called for patchy morning fog in the valleys, which was perfect for still hunting. Sound travels farther in that kind of air. The hike-in was uneventful. Just me and my headlamp cutting through the darkness, boots crunching on frost-covered leaves. I've made that walk so many times I could probably do it blindfolded. About halfway there, I clicked off my light and let my eyes adjust to the darkness. The waning moon gave just enough light to navigate by. I reached my spot around 5:30, a good hour before legal shooting light. Perfect. I settled in against the base of a big oak tree with a fallen log, providing a shooting rest about 20 yards in front of me. From this position, I could see across the saddle and up both sides of the ridge. I didn't bother with a tree stand. I've always preferred hunting from the ground where I can move if needed. The forest was dead quiet that morning. Usually there's a background chorus of owls, distant coyotes, and small creatures rustling in the undergrowth. But that day, nothing. Just the occasional drip of condensation from the trees. Should have been my first clue. Something wasn't right. As the darkness slowly gave way to the grey light of dawn, a mist started forming in the hollow below me. It rolled and billowed like something alive, filling the low places between the ridges. Through gaps in the fog, I could make out the shapes of trees and brush across the saddle, about 60 yards away. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not the light, quick steps of a deer, not the shuffling waddle of a bear. These were rhythmic, Deliberate steps, two-legged steps, heavy enough to make the forest floor compress with each one. Thump, thump, thump. My first thought was, hunter. But no hunter moves like that. We stepped carefully, rolling from heel to toe to minimize noise. These footfalls had no caution to them, just raw, confident weight. The steps came closer, moving along the ridge opposite my position. I squinted through the mist, trying to make out what was coming. The fog was playing tricks with perspective, making it hard to judge distance. Then the mist parted, and I saw it. Standing on the ridge, silhouetted against the lightning sky, was a figure. Not a man, not a bear, something else entirely. It stood upright on two legs, towering above the brush. Even at that distance, I could tell it was impossibly tall, maybe 8.5 feet at least. Its shoulders were broad. Christ, they looked to be nearly 4 feet wide, with a slightly hunched posture. Its arms hung down, much longer proportionally than a human's, nearly reaching its knees. The silhouette was massive, bulky, covered in what looked like dark hair or fur. It had a conical shape to its head, no discernible neck, just shoulders that sloped up to a pointed crown. I've been a hunter all my life. I've seen black bears rear up. I've encountered mountain lions. I've stumbled on illegal pot farms with jumpy guards. Nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever hit me with the primal fear that surged through me in that moment. Pure instinct took over. I raised my rifle, bracing it against my shoulder, finding the figure in my scope. My hands were shaking so bad I had to consciously steady my breathing. I clicked off the safety, centered the crosshairs on the massive chest of whatever this thing was, and began to squeeze the trigger. Click. The firing pin dropped, but nothing happened. No recoil, no bang, nothing. Just a dull, useless click that seemed to echo in the silent forest. No, 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 I whispered, panic flooding through me. I worked the bolt quickly, trying to eject whatever was in the chamber and feed a fresh round. But the cartridge was jammed. Somehow it had wedged itself crookedly in the chamber. I could see the brass case was deformed as I tried to work the bolt. This had never happened before. Not once in 15 years with this rifle. I always keep it meticulously cleaned and maintained. I looked up from my rifle and my blood turned to ice. The creature was staring directly at me. It hadn't moved, but somehow I knew it was fully aware of my presence. Its chest heaved with deep breaths, visible even at that distance. The mist had cleared enough that I could make out more details now. Its entire body was covered in shaggy dark brown hair, almost black in places. Where a human would have a face, this thing had a wide, flat feature with a heavy brow ridge, a flat nose, and a pronounced jawline. And the eyes, God, the eyes, deep set under that prominent brow, they glinted with an intelligence that terrified me more than anything else. Those weren't the eyes of an animal. There was awareness there, calculation, purpose. We stared at each other across the saddle for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 or 30 seconds. I was completely defenseless. My rifle was jammed. My hunting knife would be useless against something that size. Running was pointless. Whatever this thing was, it could probably cover ground faster than I ever could. Then it moved. It took a single step forward and I flinched, nearly dropping my useless rifle. But instead of charging, it did something even more unsettling. It reached up with one massive hand, fingers clearly visible, not a paw, and grasped a branch of a nearby tree. Without any apparent effort, it snapped the branch clean off. The crack echoed through the forest like a gunshot. The branch wasn't small either. It looked to be at least 3 inches thick. Was it a warning? A threat display? I couldn't tell, but I understood the message. This thing could break me just as easily. Then it started circling, moving slowly along the ridgeline, never breaking eye contact with me. It began to work its way around the clearing. Each step was deliberate, the feet landing with that same heavy thump I'd heard before. It moved with the confidence of an apex predator, never rushing, never showing concern. Twice more as it circled, it stopped to snap branches from trees. Each time the crack would echo through the forest, and each time I flinched. It wasn't random. This was intentional, a display of power, like a gorilla beating its chest, but somehow more calculated. Finally, after completing about 3/4 of a circle around my position, it stopped. For a moment, it just stood there, still staring directly at me. Then it opened its mouth. I couldn't make out teeth or details at that distance, thank God, and let out a sound that still haunts my dreams. It wasn't a roar like a bear or a scream like a panther. It was a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate the very air around me. The sound started low, almost below the threshold of hearing, then built to a volume that I felt more than heard, like standing next to a revving diesel engine. And then, without warning, it turned and walked into the trees, disappearing into the thicker forest on the backside of the ridge. I sat frozen against that oak tree for nearly 30 minutes, rifle clutched uselessly in my hands, ears straining for any sound of its return. But there was nothing, just the normal forest sounds gradually returning, a few birds starting to chirp, the wind rustling leaves. When I finally found the courage to move, my legs were so stiff with fear and inactivity that I nearly collapsed. I worked the bolt on my rifle again, finally managing to extract the jammed cartridge. The brass was crushed and deformed in a way I'd never seen before. I loaded a fresh round and chambered it, the familiar mechanical sound offering little comfort. Part of me wanted to get the hell out of there immediately. But another part, the hunter, the tracker, the man who needed proof, forced me to cross the saddle to where the creature had stood. What I found chilled me all over again. Saplings were snapped off at heights I couldn't reach, 7, maybe 8 feet up, not broken by wind or snow load, but cleanly snapped as if by hand. And the ground told the real story. In patches of bare soil between the leaf litter were impressions, not clear footprints. The forest floor was too covered with leaves and pine needles for that, but depressions where something incredibly heavy had stood. I placed my boot next to one depression for comparison. My size 12 hunting boot looked like a child's footprint next to it. The impression was nearly 18 inches long and about 8 inches wide at the broadest point. I took a few shaky photos with my phone, though they don't really show much, just shadows and impressions that could be dismissed as nothing. I didn't have a tape measure or anything to provide scale. I didn't stay long. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I kept imagining that massive shape returning, those intelligent eyes finding me again. The hike back to my truck was the longest 3 miles of my life. Every step, I expected to hear that heavy footfall behind me. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I expected to see that silhouette towering over the forest. I made it back in record time, practically jogging the last mile. That experience changed me, changed how I see the woods, changed how I hunt. I no longer go out alone. Not ever. I always carry 2 rifles now, one carefully checked and loaded before I leave home, and I never, ever hunt that particular hollow again. The thing that haunts me most isn't the creature's size, though that was terrifying enough. It's not even the intelligence I saw in those eyes, it's the timing of that jammed rifle. In 15 years, that rifle had never failed me, not once. But at that exact moment when I was facing something that shouldn't exist, the firing pin dropped on a dud round with a malformed casing, and the realization that came with it. If it had wanted me dead, there was nothing I could have done to stop it. Nothing at all. I went into those woods thinking I was the top of the food chain. I left knowing better. Story 10. I don't usually talk about this. It's been 50 years, and I still wake up sometimes with my heart racing, thinking I've seen those eyes again in the darkness of my bedroom. What happened to me on August 21st, 1973, changed me forever. I was 22 then, living in my parents' house in Derry, Pennsylvania, while saving up for my own place. It was a small town surrounded by dense forest. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone and nothing interesting ever happens. At least that's what I thought. That summer was unusually hot. Most nights I slept with my window open to catch whatever breeze might come through. My bedroom was on the second floor, facing the backyard and the woods beyond. I never worried about leaving the window open. Who would climb up 9 feet just to break in? Besides, in Derry, nobody locked their doors back then. The night it happened, I had gone to bed around 11. I remember I was dead tired from working overtime at the steel mill. The physical exhaustion usually helped me sleep deeply, but something woke me in the middle of the night. I didn't hear anything specific. It was more like a feeling, a sudden awareness that something wasn't right. You know that sensation when you realize someone's watching you, that prickly feeling on the back of your neck? It was like that, but 100 times stronger. My eyes snapped open and I was instantly alert, though I hadn't moved a muscle yet. The room was dark except for the faint moonlight filtering through my curtain. The curtain. Something was wrong with it. I had closed it before going to bed, but now it was pulled to one side, and there, framed in my open window, was a face staring directly at me. My first thought, as crazy as it sounds now, was, who put a mask in my window? Because what I was looking at couldn't be real. The face was huge, much larger than any human's, and oval-shaped with a width that seemed out of proportion. But it wasn't a mask. It was moving, breathing. It was alive. Its eyes were what terrified me most. They were deep-set and dark, completely black with no whites visible at all. I couldn't see any eyelids, no eyelashes. They didn't blink. They just stared, unmoving, unnatural, focused entirely on me. The nose was all wrong, flattened and pushed in, with wide nostrils that occasionally flared slightly. The skin wasn't what I expected either. It wasn't covered in thick fur like a bear or smooth like human skin. It was leathery, dark and rough-looking, with a texture that reminded me of tree bark, but organic. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I was paralyzed, unable to scream or move. My breath caught in my throat, and I could hear my heart hammering in my ears. I felt like prey, caught in the gaze of something that had been hunting me. Then I shifted slightly, not intentionally, just the involuntary movement of someone whose muscles are locked in terror for too long. That tiny movement was enough. The face began to pull back from the window, moving slowly, deliberately. There was something deeply unsettling about how it retreated, not quick like it was startled, but gradual, like it had gotten what it came for and was now satisfied. The movement seemed awkward, unnatural, as if its body didn't work quite right. And that's when the true horror hit me. My bedroom window was on the second floor, a good 9 feet above the ground. There was nothing outside to stand on, no ledge, no tree branch, nothing. Whatever this thing was, it had to be tall enough to peer into a second-story window while standing on the ground, 9 feet tall, at least. After the face disappeared, I stayed completely still, straining to hear any sound of movement outside. But there was nothing. No rustling in the bushes below my window, no snapping twigs, no heavy footsteps retreating into the woods. Just complete silence, which was wrong in itself. On a summer night in Pennsylvania, there should have been crickets, frogs, all sorts of night noises, but there was only silence. I don't know how long I lay there, rigid with fear, barely breathing. Minutes, hours, the night seemed endless. I couldn't bring myself to get up and close the window. I couldn't even reach for the lamp on my bedside table. I just lay there, covers pulled up to my chin, staring at the open window, terrified that the face would return. It didn't. Not that night, anyway. When the first light of dawn finally started filtering through my window, I practically leaped out of bed, slammed the window shut, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage the latch. I pulled the curtains closed and backed away, still facing the window as if that thing might burst through at any moment. I went downstairs and made coffee, even though I never drank it before. I needed something to do with my hands. My parents were still asleep, and I didn't want to wake them. What would I even say? Hey, some kind of monster was looking in my window last night. They'd think I had a nightmare or was losing my mind. Maybe I was. But I knew what I'd seen. Later that morning, I went outside to look for evidence. The ground beneath my window was covered in grass, but I was hoping to find footprints or some sign of what had been there. Nothing. Not a single blade of grass looked disturbed. I checked the siding of the house for scratch marks or anything that might suggest something had climbed up. Nothing there either. I walked to the edge of the woods, about 50 feet from the house. There, I found something that made my blood run cold. A path of flattened vegetation led into the trees, as if something large had moved through there recently. The undergrowth was pressed down in a way that didn't match any animal I knew. Too wide for a deer, too deliberate for a bear. I followed the path a little way into the woods, but stopped when I realized how quiet it was. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just eerie silence. I turned and ran back to the house. That day at work, I was a mess. I couldn't focus on anything. My supervisor asked if I was feeling all right, and I mumbled something about not sleeping well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face staring at me. Those eyes, those horrible dead black eyes. When I got home that evening, I asked my dad if we could nail my window shut. He looked at me like I was crazy. "What for? You complain about the heat enough as it is," he said. I made up some story about hearing weird noises outside my window at night. Probably raccoons trying to get in. He laughed it off. Told me raccoons don't climb that high, but helped me put a better lock on the window anyway. Not that it mattered. A lock wouldn't stop something 9 feet tall from breaking the glass if it wanted to. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the window before going to bed. I kept a baseball bat beside me and left the lights on. Still, I didn't sleep more than a few minutes at a time. Every small noise made me jolt awake, gripping the bat, ready to swing at shadows. The next few nights were the same. Sleepless, paranoid, jumping at every sound. I kept the window locked and blocked, curtains drawn tight. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Who would believe me? Even I was starting to wonder if I'd dreamed the whole thing. But then, 5 nights after the first incident, I heard it. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when a sound came from outside. A low, rumbling grunt, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Not a bear, not a deer, not any animal native to Pennsylvania that I knew of. It was followed by the distinct sound of something large moving through the underbrush at the edge of the woods. I froze, my entire body rigid with fear. The noises continued. Heavy footsteps, branches snapping, that occasional grunt. Whatever it was circling the house. Then came the scratching. Soft at first, then more insistent. Not at my window, but at the back door downstairs, like something was testing it, seeing if it would open. I wanted to wake my parents, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I just lay there listening as the scratching continued for what felt like forever, then finally stopped. Silence fell again, but I knew it was still out there, waiting, watching. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a new sound, a weird, rhythmic tapping on the side of the house. It took me a moment to realize it was moving. The tapping started near the back door, then moved along the wall, getting higher, as if whatever was making the noise was climbing. My heart nearly stopped when I realized it was heading toward my window. I gripped the baseball bat so hard my knuckles turned white. The tapping stopped just outside my window. There was a long pause, then a slow scraping sound against the glass. I imagined those leathery fingers dragging across my window, searching for a way in. The dresser I'd placed in front of the window suddenly shifted slightly, as if something had pushed against the window with considerable force. I bit back a scream. The curtains were still drawn, but I could see a large shadow through them. Something massive was definitely outside. The window frame creaked under pressure. Whatever was out there, it was trying to get in. I raised the bat, ready to defend myself, though I knew it would be useless against something that size. Just as I thought the window would give way, a car turned into our driveway, headlights sweeping across the house. My older brother coming home late from his shift at the hospital. The shadow at my window instantly disappeared. I heard a heavy thud as something dropped to the ground, then silence. When my brother came in, I was still frozen in place, bat in hand, staring at the window. He found me like that when he checked on me before going to bed, something he never did normally. It was like some sixth sense told him to look in on me that night. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked, flipping on the light. I broke down then, told him everything through tears and gasping breaths. I expected him to laugh, to tell me I'd had a nightmare. He didn't. He listened, face growing more serious by the second. "I believe you," he said finally. "Mr. Jenkins over on Maple Street said something's been killing his livestock. Found a cow 2 days ago, torn apart like nothing he's ever seen. And the miller's dog went missing last week, still hasn't come back." We stayed up the rest of the night, keeping watch. Nothing else happened. But when morning came, we found deep scratches on the side of the house leading up to my window, and a distinct impression in the flower bed below, like something very heavy had landed there. My parents couldn't explain it. My dad called the police, but they just wrote it off as vandalism. Maybe some local kids playing a prank. They didn't take the scratches or the stories about livestock seriously. We moved 3 weeks later. My parents said it was because Dad got a better job offer in Ohio, but I knew the real reason. None of us felt safe in that house anymore. I still don't know what I saw that night. I've spent years researching, trying to find anything that matches what I experienced. Some say it might have been a Bigfoot, but the descriptions never quite match up. The face I saw wasn't ape-like or human-like. It was something else, something not from here. The worst part is the feeling I've had ever since, that it wasn't a random encounter. That thing found me, specifically chose me, and sometimes even 50 years later when I'm alone at night, I still feel watched, still catch myself checking that my windows are locked, and I still wake up sometimes, heart racing, convinced that if I turn toward my window, I'll see that face staring back at me again. Story 11. I've never really talked about this with anyone outside my family. It's been over 50 years now, but I can still remember that day in May of '72 like it was yesterday. I was 10 years old then, and nothing in my life has ever compared to what I saw that afternoon. We lived in a small house with a decent-sized yard that backed up against a dense stretch of woods. Dad had planted a vegetable garden that spring. He was always proud of his tomatoes and cucumbers. Mom worked in town, and Dad would often leave us kids to our own devices when he had to run errands. Being the middle child, I was supposed to keep an eye on my little brother Tommy, who had just turned 5, while my older sister Joni, who was 12, was technically in charge. It was a warm day, unusually warm for May. The kind of day where you can smell the earth warming up and everything feels alive. Tommy had been riding his tricycle around the yard for about an hour while Joni and I sat on the porch steps, probably arguing about something stupid like we always did. I remember the buzz of insects and how the air felt thick with humidity. Tommy had been circling around the side of the house where we couldn't see him, but we could hear the squeaky wheel of his trike. We weren't really paying attention until everything went quiet. Then we heard his footsteps, fast, panicky footsteps, coming around the house. When he burst into view, his face was white as a sheet. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. Pure fear. He was running so hard he tripped on the first porch step and scrambled up on his hands and knees. "Monster!" he gasped, pointing back toward the side yard. "Monster outside!" Joni rolled her eyes. Tommy was always making up stories about monsters and dinosaurs, but something about the way his little body was trembling made me think this wasn't just another game. "What kind of monster, Tommy?" I asked, trying to sound calm, even though his fear was starting to rub off on me. big, hairy monster," he said, his voice cracking, "playing with my trike." Joni and I exchanged looks. She seemed annoyed, but I could tell she was a little worried too. "I'll go check it out," she sighed, standing up. "Probably just a neighbor's dog or something." "I'm coming too," I said, not wanting to be left alone with Tommy, who was now clinging to my arm. "Stay here," Tommy begged, grabbing at my shirt. "Don't go. The monster will get you." I peeled his fingers off my arm. "There's no monster, Tommy. We'll be right back." We walked down the porch steps slowly, Joni leading the way. As we rounded the corner of the house, I was fully expecting to see nothing, or maybe a raccoon at worst. What we saw instead stopped us dead in our tracks. Tommy's red tricycle was lying on its side on the lawn, and next to it was something that made my blood run cold. At first glance, I thought it was a kid in a costume. It was small, maybe 4 feet tall, and it was crouched down next to the trike, spinning one of the wheels with what looked like hands. But as I stared, I realized this was no costume. The thing was covered head to toe in dark brown hair, not fur exactly, more like long human hair, but all over its body. Its face, God, its face was like a cross between a human and a monkey, but not quite either. It had deep-set eyes under a prominent brow, a flat nose, and a mouth that seemed too wide. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Joni's hand found mine and squeezed so tight it hurt, but I barely noticed. The creature hadn't seen us yet. It seemed fascinated by the spinning wheel, tilting its head as it watched the motion. It made a soft hooting sound that raised the hair on the back of my neck. Then Joni gasped. She couldn't help it. And the thing's head snapped up. For a split second, our eyes locked with its eyes. They were dark and surprisingly aware, intelligent. That's what freaked me out the most. There was someone home behind those eyes. The second it saw us, it made a high-pitched barking sound and bolted to its feet. That's when things went from terrifying to absolutely unbelievable. From behind the big oak tree at the edge of our yard stepped something massive. It was like the smaller creature, but enormous. Easily 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It was broader than any man I'd ever seen, covered in the same dark hair, but with grey patches on its chest and around what I guess was its face. The little one ran straight to the big one, moving in a strange, loping gait, half running, half jumping. It was fast, way faster than any kid could move. The big one immediately reached out with one massive arm and swept the smaller one behind it. The protective gesture was so human, like a parent shielding their child. The big one stared at us for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. I'll never forget those eyes. Deep set under that prominent brow ridge, intelligent and calculating. It made no sound, but its chest heaved as if it was breathing hard. Then with one fluid motion it turned and pushed the smaller one toward the brush at the edge of our property. The little one actually jumped, and I mean jumped, over our 3-foot fence like it was nothing. The big one followed, stepping over the fence like you'd step over a crack in the sidewalk. Within seconds they were gone. The woods swallowed them up without a trace, leaves barely rustling as they disappeared. Joni and I stood there, frozen. I don't know how long we stayed like that, maybe a minute, maybe 10. Finally, she tugged my arm. "Get Tommy," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Get him inside. Lock the doors." I ran back to the porch where Tommy was huddled, sobbing quietly. I scooped him up and carried him inside, my legs feeling like jelly. Joni followed, slamming and locking the door behind us. We huddled in the living room, all the doors and windows locked, blinds drawn. None of us spoke. What was there to say? We'd seen something impossible, something that shouldn't exist. Dad got home about an hour later. He found us sitting in silence. Tommy curled up in Joni's lap, me keeping watch at the window through a crack in the blinds. "What's going on?" he asked, immediately sensing something was wrong. We all started talking at once. Tommy kept saying, "Monsters." I was trying to explain about the tricycle, and Joni was the only one making any sense. Dad listened, his face growing more serious by the second. "Show me," he finally said. We all went outside together, Tommy refusing to leave Dad's side. The tricycle was still there, lying on its side where the creature had left it. Dad examined it carefully, then started looking at the ground around it. That's when he found the footprints. They were pressed into the soft earth of Mom's flower bed. Huge, barefoot-looking prints, at least 16 inches long. Next to them were smaller prints, similar in shape but about the size of a child's foot. Dad stood there for a long time, just staring at those prints. Then he walked to the edge of the property and examined the fence, the brush beyond it, and finally the tree line. When he came back, his face was pale. "Dad?" Joni asked. "What were they?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know for sure, but I could tell he had an idea, and it scared him." Later that night, after Tommy was in bed, Dad sat us down at the kitchen table. He spoke in a low voice, even though Mom was still at work. "I want you kids to listen to me carefully," he said. "We're not going to talk about what you saw today with anyone outside this family. Not your friends, not your teachers, no one." "But Dad," I protested, "what were they?" He sighed heavily. "Some folks around these parts call them Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Most people think they're just stories." He paused. "I've never seen one myself, but my own father swore he encountered something similar when he was young." "You believe us?" Joni asked, sounding relieved. "I believe you saw something," he said carefully. "Those tracks are real enough." Then he told us something that made my skin crawl. For the past few weeks, vegetables had been disappearing from his garden. At first, he thought it was rabbits or deer, but they'd take the whole plant, roots and all. Whatever was taking our vegetables was pulling them up carefully and carrying them off. "I think they've been watching us," he said quietly. "Maybe for a while now." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the little one playing with Tommy's tricycle. It had seemed almost curious, like a child discovering a new toy, and the way the big one had protected it, that was a parent looking out for its kid, just like my dad would do for me. Were they monsters? I wasn't so sure anymore. Strange and terrifying, yes, but monsters? I don't know. Dad put up more fencing after that, installed motion lights too. The vegetables stopped disappearing, and we never saw the creatures again, though sometimes at night I'd swear I could hear strange calls from the woods. Not quite animal, not quite human. I'm in my 60s now, with grandkids of my own. I've read about Bigfoot sightings over the years, seen the blurry photos and shaky videos. People debate whether they're real, and scientists say there's no evidence. But I know what I saw that day in May of '72. I saw a child and its parent, not human, but not simply animals either, something in between, something that doesn't fit into our understanding of the world. Sometimes I wonder about that little one. Did it tell its own family about the strange human children it saw that day? Did it grow up and have children of its own? Is it still out there in some forest, staying hidden, watching us from the trees? I'll never know, but I'll also never forget the day they came to our yard, the day that changed how I see the world forever. Story 12. I still get goosebumps thinking about what I saw that day. It was August 24th, 1999. I remember the date so clearly because it changed everything I thought I knew about what exists in our world. I was driving south on Highway 6 in Manitoba, heading back from a fishing trip up north. It was around 2 in the afternoon, broad daylight with blue skies, perfect visibility. I wasn't tired or anything. I'd stopped for lunch about an hour before and had a coffee, so I was alert and focused on the road. This stretch of highway near Gypsumville is pretty isolated. For those who don't know the area, northern Manitoba is mostly dense swamp spruce, lots of large lakes, and not many people. It's the kind of desolate country where you could get lost and never be found. Your cell phone doesn't work out there, and the roads can go on forever without seeing another car. I was cruising along, windows down, enjoying the summer air, when I noticed something moving in a grain field about 50 yards off to the right of the highway. At first, I thought it was a bear. We get plenty of those up here, and it seemed the right size from a distance. It was hunched over, like it was digging or foraging for something in the dirt. As I got closer, something felt off about it. The movements weren't quite right for a bear. I slowed down a bit, curious. That's when it happened. The figure stood up on two legs. My heart literally skipped a beat. This was no bear. The grain in that field only came up to its knees. Let that sink in. An average grain field is what, maybe 3 feet tall. This thing was massive. I'm not exaggerating when I say it must have been 7 feet tall minimum. And it wasn't thin or lanky. This creature was built like a linebacker, probably around 500 pounds of solid mass. What really struck me was the coloration. It wasn't just a solid brown like you'd expect from most wildlife. It had this distinct two-tone pattern, brown and light brown. The chest and the back of its head were a lighter brown, while the rest of it was darker. Its arms were incredibly thick, from the shoulders all the way down to its waist, reminded me of a gorilla in that way. And speaking of gorillas, it had practically no neck. The head just kind of sat on those massive shoulders, but it wasn't a gorilla. This was something else entirely. When it stood up, it turned and looked directly at my vehicle. I wasn't more than 40 yards away at this point. There was this moment, this horrible, frozen moment where we just stared at each other. I couldn't look away, and it seemed equally fixated on me. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles went white. My foot eased off the gas pedal unconsciously. Part of me wanted to stop completely, but another part, the smarter part, knew that was a terrible idea. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, towering over that grain field, watching me pass. I had clear lens driving glasses on, just regular glasses for driving, nothing fancy, so my vision wasn't obscured at all. There was no mistaking what I was seeing. As I drove past, I kept looking in my rearview mirror until I couldn't see it anymore. I expected it to run or disappear into the trees that lined the field, but it just stood there, watching me go. That's almost more terrifying than if it had charged the car or something. I kept driving, probably going way too fast after that. My hands were shaking so bad I had to pull over about 10 minutes down the road. I sat there on the shoulder, engine running, just trying to process what I'd seen. I've been a hunter and outdoorsman my whole life. I know every animal native to Manitoba. This wasn't a moose, a bear, or any known wildlife. It wasn't a person in a suit. No way. The proportions were all wrong. And who the hell would be standing in a remote grain field in a costume in the middle of nowhere? The isolation hit me then. I was alone on this highway, miles from the nearest town, and I'd just seen something that shouldn't exist. I checked my mirrors constantly for the next hour, half expecting to see it following me. When I got home that evening, I didn't tell anyone right away. Who would believe me? I'd sound crazy. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. The image of that creature was burned into my mind. Its massive frame, those proportions that were almost human but definitely not, the way it just stood there watching me. A few days later, I finally worked up the courage to search online about similar sightings. That's when I got my second shock of the week. There were other reports. Other people had seen something similar in that exact same area near Gypsumville. Some going back decades. I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't alone. One report from 1987 described almost the same creature. Two-tone coloration, massive build, spotted near a field off Highway 6. Another from 1994 mentioned a gorilla-like figure standing in the tree line just north of where I'd had my sighting. Reading those accounts gave me chills, but also a weird sense of relief. Whatever I saw that day was real. Other people had seen it too. I've replayed that moment in my head thousands of times since then. Could it have been something else? Some weird trick of the light or an unusual bear? No. I know what bears look like when they stand up. They don't have that build, that height, or that coloration. And they certainly don't stand still and watch you like that. The way it was bent over when I first spotted it, it looked like it was deliberately digging for something. Not random foraging, but purposeful digging. Almost human-like in its movements. Then the way it stood and turned, it was smooth, deliberate, intelligent. Sometimes I think about going back there with a camera, try to see it again, to get proof. But something stops me every time I seriously consider it. Fear, I guess. Not just fear of the creature itself, but fear of what it would mean if I could prove it exists. Some things maybe we're not meant to know for sure. I drive that highway a couple times a year still. Every time I pass that spot near Gypsumville, I slow down and scan the fields and tree lines. I haven't seen it again, but I always feel like I'm being watched in that area now. The landscape there is perfect for something to remain hidden. The swamps, the dense forests, countless lakes and waterways. You could have a whole population of these creatures out there and never know it. The locals talk sometimes about strange sounds at night, weird tracks found in remote areas. Most folks laugh it off, but I don't, not anymore. What bothers me most is the question of intelligence. This wasn't just some animal. The way it looked at me had purpose, recognition. It knew I was seeing it and it was seeing me. There was an acknowledgement there, a mutual awareness that still makes my skin crawl. I've told only a handful of people about this over the years. My brother, who didn't believe me, a buddy who hunts with me, who said I probably saw a bear and my mind played tricks. And my wife, who doesn't discount it entirely, but suggests maybe the distance made it hard to judge accurately. But I know what I saw. That thing was no bear. It was no man in a suit. It was something that most people think is just a legend, a campfire story. But it's out there in the Manitoba wilderness. I've seen it with my own eyes in broad daylight, no more than 40 yards away. I've never been a believer in the supernatural or cryptids before this. I'm still not, really. I just know that there's at least one creature out there in Manitoba that science hasn't classified yet. Something large, bipedal and intelligent enough to stay hidden from most people. If you're driving through northern Manitoba, especially near Gypsumville on Highway 6, keep your eyes open. Look to the fields, to the edges of the forests. You might see something that will change your understanding of the world, just like it changed mine on that clear August day in 1999. I still don't know what to call what I saw. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, some unknown primate. The name doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's real. It's out there. And for one brief moment, it stood in plain sight and looked right at me. And sometimes, on nights when I can't sleep, I wonder if it remembers me too. Story 13. I'm still shaken thinking about what happened to me all those years ago. It was January 1979, and even though it's been decades, I remember every detail like it was yesterday. The cold, the snow, that smell, and what I saw standing by that pond. I was 16 at the time, spending the day at my friend's family farm outside of Patton in Cambria County, Pennsylvania. It was one of those rural places where everybody knew everybody, and city folks would get lost trying to find it on a map. The kind of place where you could still be a teenager helping with farm work without all the regulations they have nowadays. That day, we'd been packaging butchered beef. It was hard work, wrapping meat in freezer paper, taping it up, labeling everything. My hands were raw from the cold meat, and my back was aching from standing all day. I remember the smell of fresh beef and the wax paper, the sound of the tape dispenser, and how the adults would laugh and tell stories while we worked. It was normal stuff for country living. By the time we finished, it was getting dark. January days are short in Pennsylvania, and the sun starts setting around 4:30. I realized I'd missed my ride home. My mom was supposed to pick me up, but there had been some confusion about the time. This was long before cell phones, so when someone didn't show up, you were just stuck. My friend's family offered to let me stay overnight, but I knew my parents would be worried if I didn't come home, so I decided to walk. It wasn't that far, maybe 3 miles to my uncle's house, and from there I could call my parents to come get me. In hindsight, it was a stupid decision with the snow and cold, but when you're 16, you think you're invincible. I bundled up in my winter coat, gloves, and a wool hat. My friend's dad tried to talk me out of it, saying a storm was coming, but I was stubborn. "I'll be fine," I said. "I'll cut through the backfield and be at my uncle's in no time." Stupid kid. When I stepped outside, the cold hit me like a slap in the face. It was maybe 15 degrees, and the sky was that deep winter grey that promises more snow. There was already about 4 inches on the ground, pristine white, except for where they'd cleared paths around the farm. The world had that muffled quality that comes with fresh snow, like everything is wrapped in cotton, and that's when I noticed the smell. It's hard to describe it properly, but imagine dirty laundry that's been sitting wet in a hamper for days, mixed with a musky, stale sweat odor. Like something animal, but not quite. It was thick in the air despite the cold, which was strange because smells don't usually carry well in winter air. It was so strong, it made my nose wrinkle. At first, I thought maybe it was something from the farm, a dead animal or the manure pile, but this was different. This smell had a presence to it. I walked a few steps down the lane, pulling my scarf up over my nose, when I saw it. About 80 to 100 yards away, standing by their pond embankment, was this massive dark figure. The sun was almost gone, but there was still enough light to make out its silhouette against the white snow. It stood upright on 2 legs, but it wasn't a person. No way. This thing had shoulders that must have been 3 feet wide at least. The arms were thick, hanging longer than a human's would. It was covered in what looked like dark hair, not clothing, but actual hair that seemed coarse and heavy, like a buffalo's winter coat but longer. The whole figure was just massive. I'd guess 7, maybe 8 feet tall, and solid. Not fat, but powerfully built. For a moment, we just stood there. It was like we recognized each other's presence at the same time. There was this horrible moment of awareness. Me seeing it seeing me. I could feel its attention lock onto me, even at that distance. I knew instantly this wasn't a bear standing up. Bears don't stand that naturally, and the proportions were all wrong, and it definitely wasn't a person in a costume. Not out here, not in the middle of nowhere in winter. My body reacted before my brain could process what was happening. 1 second I was frozen in place, and the next I was running down the lane, my boots slipping in the snow. I didn't scream, I didn't call out. Some primal part of me knew that drawing more attention would be bad. I'd gotten maybe 200 yards down the lane when I heard it, crashing through the woods to my right, about 150 feet away. Whatever it was moved fast, breaking branches and pushing through the underbrush. There was no attempt at stealth. It was just power. Pure power pushing straight through everything in its path. The sound paralleled my movement. It was following me from inside the tree line. Whenever I sped up, the crashing would speed up too. My lungs were burning from the cold air, and my legs were already tired from the day's work. But terror gave me energy I didn't know I had. I kept my eyes fixed on the lane ahead, too afraid to look into the woods to try to spot it. The lane curved slightly, following the edge of the property, and I remember thinking how exposed I was. The only moving thing in a landscape of white and grey. The worst part was knowing it could have easily cut across and intercepted me. It was moving at least as fast as I was, probably faster, and it could have burst out of the trees at any moment. But it didn't. It just kept pace, crashing through the woods alongside me. This went on for about half a mile. I could hear my own laboured breathing, the sound of my boots on the packed snow of the lane, and that terrible crashing keeping pace with me. Then suddenly the noise stopped. I didn't. I kept running, afraid to slow down even for a second. I strained my ears, trying to hear over my own panting breath, wondering if it had gotten ahead of me or if it had given up. The silence was almost worse than the crashing had been. I ran the entire way to my uncle's house. By the time I got there, I was completely exhausted. My legs were numb, my lungs felt like they were filled with glass, and I was drenched in sweat despite the freezing temperature. I practically fell through the front door, startling my aunt and uncle who were sitting down to dinner. I couldn't even speak at first. I just collapsed inside the entryway, gasping for air. When they asked what happened, I couldn't bring myself to tell them. What would I say? That I saw a monster, that something impossible had chased me through the woods. They'd think I was making it up, or that I'd seen a bear and panicked. So I blamed it on the cold and the dark, said I got spooked walking alone and had run most of the way. My uncle gave me that look adults give kids when they know you're not telling the whole truth, but he didn't push it. That night, after my parents picked me up, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silhouette by the pond. I kept thinking about how it had moved through the woods, not like an animal finding its way through the trees, but like something that simply pushed aside whatever was in its path. For months afterward, I refused to go anywhere near my friend's farm. I made excuses, said I was busy with school, anything to avoid going back there. I never told anyone what I'd seen. Who would believe me? Even now, writing this out, part of me worries people will think I'm making it up, or that I just saw a bear and my teenage imagination filled in the rest. But I know what I saw, and I know what I smelled, that distinctive odor that I've never encountered anywhere else. Years later, I was at a friend's house when they put on this documentary that included the Patterson-Gimlin film. You know, that famous footage from the 60s showing what some people believe is a Bigfoot walking through a clearing. When that creature turned and looked at the camera, I felt all the air leave my lungs, the way it moved, its proportions, that casual power in its stride. It was exactly like what I had seen that winter night in Pennsylvania. I've spent a lot of time since then reading about other people's encounters, trying to make sense of what happened. Some stories match mine so closely it's eerie, the smell, the way it paralleled their movement, the overwhelming sense of intelligence behind the encounter. I've learned there's a long history of sightings in the Appalachian region, going back to before European settlement. I've never gone back to that specific farm. The family sold it in the mid-80s, and I heard the new owners tore down the old buildings and built something more modern. I wonder if they've ever smelled that strange odor on cold winter nights, or if they've ever glimpsed something impossible standing by their pond. I still find myself scanning the tree line whenever I'm in rural areas. I still tense up when I smell anything remotely similar to what I encountered that day. And I still can't explain exactly what I saw. All I know is that for about half a mile on a snowy January evening in 1979, something kept pace with me through the Pennsylvania woods, something that shouldn't exist but does, something that, for whatever reason, decided to let me go. Story 14. I still can't believe I'm finally writing this down. It's been 5 years, and I've only told a handful of people about what happened to me that day. Most think I'm either lying or that I hit my head and hallucinated the whole thing. But I know what I experienced was real. The physical injuries alone prove something happened out there. It was early June 2018, a perfect day for hiking in the Shawnee National Forest. I'd been to Garden of the Gods many times before. It's one of my favorite spots in southern Illinois, with those amazing rock formations. The main trails are beautiful, but always crowded with tourists. So I often went off trail to explore the more remote rocky areas. I'd been doing solo hikes for years and never felt unsafe. That morning I packed light, just water, some trail mix, a small first aid kit, my phone, though reception is spotty at best out there, and my Glock 19. I always carry when hiking alone. Not because I'm paranoid, but because it's remote wilderness and better safe than sorry. I've never had to use it, but that day I came close. I started on the observation trail around 7 in the morning, but quickly veered off onto a game trail I knew would lead to some spectacular rock formations that weren't on any tourist map. The weather was perfect, about 70 degrees, partly cloudy, with a light breeze keeping the bugs away. I remember feeling so at peace as I climbed up to higher elevations, taking photos of wildflowers and interesting rock formations along the way. By around 1 in the afternoon, I'd reached this amazing rock crest that offers views across the entire forest. The tree canopy stretches out below you like a green ocean. I sat there eating my lunch, completely alone and loving every minute of it. I'd hiked probably 4 miles off the main trail at this point, in an area very few people ever venture to. After about 30 minutes of rest, I decided to head back since it would take a few hours to return to my car before sunset. That's when things started getting weird. I'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I first noticed the sounds. At first, I thought it was just my own footsteps echoing off the rocks, or maybe a deer moving parallel to my path. But something felt off. The footfalls were too heavy, too deliberate. They seemed to be keeping pace with me, but staying about 30 yards back in the dense forest to my right. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I started walking again, and after a brief pause, they started again too. That's when my heart rate kicked up. In all my years hiking, I'd never experienced anything like this. Bears don't stalk people this way. Deer would have bounded off. A person would have either called out or tried to be more stealthy. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound confident. No response. I picked up my pace slightly, and whatever it was matched me. That's when my mind went to the worst place. Was someone following me? A hunter? Some creep who'd spotted me hiking alone? I slipped my hand into my pack and gripped my Glock. After another 5 minutes of this cat-and-mouse game, I stopped abruptly, pulled out my gun, and chambered a round loud enough for anyone to hear. The universal "back off" warning. But instead of retreating, the footsteps actually seemed to get closer, moving from 30 yards to maybe 25. "I'm armed," I shouted, my voice echoing across the rocks. "Identify yourself now." That's when I heard something that still gives me nightmares. It wasn't words or even an animal call I recognized. It was this deep, guttural rumbling sound, like something between a growl and a hum, but coming from something with a chest cavity much larger than a human's. It seemed to resonate through the trees, making the leaves vibrate. I'm not ashamed to admit I panicked then. I tucked my gun into my waistband and started moving faster, no longer caring about being quiet. Whatever was following me immediately picked up pace too. I could hear branches snapping, undergrowth being crushed under heavy weight. When I broke into a jog, all hell broke loose. Something, a stick at first, flew past my head and hit a tree to my left. Then a rock about the size of my fist landed a few feet ahead of me. I glanced back and saw nothing, but more projectiles started coming. Pine cones, rocks, broken branches, all sailing through the air around me, some missing by inches. Who throws sticks? Not a bear or mountain lion, a person. But why would they stay hidden, and how could they throw with such force? I started running full out now, gun in hand, terrified. The ground was uneven, full of roots and rocks, and I nearly twisted my ankle several times. The footfalls behind me got faster too. Heavy thuds that sounded like someone twice my size running, but somehow moving through the thick undergrowth with more ease than should be possible. That's when I heard it. A sound I still can't properly describe. It started as that same deep rumble, but built into this high-pitched, piercing screech that seemed to fill the entire forest. It wasn't human. It wasn't any animal I've ever heard. It felt primal and angry and so loud it made my ears ring. I was running so hard my lungs burned, trying to get back to the main trail where there might be other hikers. I remember thinking I just needed to make it another half-mile or so. The thing behind me was getting closer. I could hear it crashing through the brush maybe 15 yards back now. I risked another glance over my shoulder, and that's when it happened. I didn't see what hit me. I just felt this tremendous impact across my back. like I'd been struck with a tree trunk. The force lifted me off my feet and slammed me forward. My head hit something hard, and everything went black. When I came to, the forest was silent except for normal bird sounds. The light had changed. The sun was much lower. My watch showed it was almost 6 in the evening. I'd been unconscious for hours. Everything hurt. My head was pounding, and when I tried to sit up, a stabbing pain shot through my rib cage that made me gasp. I felt around, and my gun was still in my waistband, and my backpack was beside me, apparently untouched. Nothing had been stolen. I managed to drag myself to a sitting position against a tree and took inventory. My water bottles were still in my pack. My phone was intact. Nothing seemed to be missing, but my body was wrecked. I lifted my shirt and saw a massive bruise already forming across my back. A single long stripe, like I'd been hit with something straight and hard. I later found out I had 2 cracked ribs. It took me over 3 hours to make it back to my car. Every step was agony, but the weird thing was, I felt watched the entire time, not followed, just observed from a distance. I didn't hear any more footsteps or have anything else thrown at me. It was like whatever had attacked me was making sure I left its territory but wasn't interested in finishing me off. The drive to the emergency room was a blur. I told the doctors I'd fallen down a steep incline while hiking, because what else could I say? Something in the woods threw sticks at me, then knocked me unconscious. They'd have added a psychiatric evaluation to my medical bills. The doctor who treated me seemed skeptical of my story, though. He pointed out that my injury looked more like I'd been struck from behind with something long and solid, like a baseball bat, not like injuries typically sustained in a fall. The bruise was too uniform, too straight. But he didn't push it, just gave me painkillers and told me to take it easy for 6 weeks while my ribs healed. I spent those weeks researching, reading about other encounters in the Shawnee National Forest, looking at reports of unexplained phenomena in southern Illinois, and that's when I found the Bigfoot sighting reports, dozens of them going back decades, stories about rock throwing, about that same screeching sound, about people being followed but not directly confronted. I've gone back and forth about whether to share this. I don't want to be that crazy person claiming they saw Bigfoot. The truth is, I never actually saw what attacked me, but I know what I experienced wasn't a bear, wasn't a mountain lion, and definitely wasn't a person. The strength it took to knock me off my feet and crack my ribs with a single blow, the unnatural sounds it made, the intelligence it showed by pacing me, throwing objects, and seemingly warning me before attacking. It's been 5 years, and I still hike, but never alone and never off trail in Shawnee. I still carry my gun, but I know now it probably wouldn't have helped me that day. Whatever was out there was faster and stronger than me by a huge margin. If it had wanted to kill me, it could have. Sometimes I wonder if running was what triggered the attack, like I tripped some predatory instinct, or maybe it was angry that I'd ventured into its territory. Either way, I got a warning I'll never forget. I still have nightmares about that screech, about being watched through the trees by something intelligent enough to throw objects with accuracy, but wild enough to attack without provocation, something that everyone says doesn't exist, but I know better now. Story 15. I've been reading posts on here for a long time, but never thought I'd be sharing something myself. What happened back in November of either 1970 or 71 has stayed with me for decades, and honestly, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I've told a few close friends over the years, but most people just laugh it off or think I was seeing things because we'd been drinking. Trust me, what we saw that night was all too real. I was 23 at the time, living in Crawford County, Pennsylvania. It's a rural area, lots of farmland, thick forests and dirt roads that wind through the middle of nowhere. My buddy Tim and I had gone out for a few beers at Mac's Tavern, this dive bar that used to be about 15 miles outside of Meadville. Nothing fancy, just a place to unwind on a Friday night. We weren't wasted or anything, maybe 3 beers each over the course of several hours. I was always careful about driving, especially on those back roads where you might hit a deer if you weren't paying attention. Tim lived even further out in the sticks than I did, so I was giving him a ride home before heading to my own place. It was around 11:30 at night when we left the bar, cold as hell, probably in the low 30s, with that damp Pennsylvania chill that cuts right through your clothes. No snow yet, but you could feel it coming. The sky was clear though, almost a full moon, which made visibility surprisingly good for that time of night. We were about 20 minutes into the drive, on this narrow dirt road that cut through a section of dense woods. The trees were bare, just skeletal branches reaching up on both sides. My headlights were the only illumination for miles, casting long shadows across the road. We weren't talking much, just listening to the radio. I think it was 3 Dog Night or something, when I noticed something up ahead. At first, I thought it was a deer, which would have been completely normal. But as we got closer, I realized it was upright. Walking. No, not walking. Jogging steadily along the edge of the road, about 100 yards ahead. "Tim, you see that?" I remember asking, slowing down slightly. "Yeah," he said, leaning forward in his seat. "Looks like some crazy bastard out for a midnight run." That was the logical explanation, but something felt off immediately. Who the hell would be jogging on a freezing November night, on a dirt road miles from anywhere? And as we got closer, I could see that whoever it was seemed to be naked. That's when the first real chill went down my spine. "What the hell is wrong with that guy?" Tim said, laughing nervously. "He's gonna freeze his ass off out here." I slowed down even more as we approached. The figure kept a steady pace, not turning to look at us despite the headlights and the sound of the car. He was on the right side of the road, jogging with a fluid, almost mechanical motion, not labored at all despite the cold. We were about 50 feet behind him now, and I remember thinking I should offer him a ride. Crazy or not, nobody should be out in that weather without clothes. But then we pulled alongside him, and everything changed in an instant. It wasn't a man. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't human, not even close. The creature, because that's all I can call it, was covered head to toe in light brown hair, not like a bear or a dog, more like, I don't know how to describe it exactly. The hair was uniform, maybe an inch or 2 long all over its body, a kind of beige or light brown color. Its build was solid, muscular but proportional, standing upright on 2 legs like a man would. Probably 6 feet tall, maybe a bit more. But it was the face that hit me like a punch to the gut. Completely flat, with none of the features you'd expect on a human face. The eyes were small and dark, set wide apart with absolutely no expression in them, no curiosity, no fear, nothing. Its nose was barely there, just a slight bump with 2 nostrils. The mouth was small, just a slit really. The whole face looked almost like it had been pressed flat, with features added as an afterthought. I remember my hand starting to shake on the steering wheel as we came alongside it. The creature turned its head, not its body, just its head, and looked directly at us through the passenger window where Tim was sitting. There was an intelligence in those eyes, but nothing I recognized as human emotion. No surprise at seeing a car, no anger at being interrupted, nothing. It just observed us, still maintaining that steady jogging pace. "Holy fucking shit!" Tim shouted, scrambling back across the seat toward me. "What the fuck is that thing?" I couldn't even speak. My throat closed up completely. The creature was less than 4 feet away from us, separated only by the car window. I could see every detail in the moonlight and headlights. The way the hair moved slightly in the breeze, the muscles working beneath it, the complete absence of clothing or anything human. For a split second, our eyes locked. I swear to God, looking into those eyes was like looking into emptiness. Not evil, not good, just completely alien. It registered us the way you might notice a rock on the side of the road. It felt like time stopped for a moment. Then Tim screamed again, and I snapped out of it. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal so hard, I'm surprised it didn't go through the floor. The tires spun on the dirt road before catching, and we shot forward, the engine of my old Chevy Nova roaring. "Go, go, go!" Tim was yelling, turned completely around in his seat, staring out the back window. Jesus Christ, what was that? What the fuck was that? I was too terrified to look back, focusing on the road ahead, trying not to crash as I took the curves way too fast. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. After about 30 seconds, I had to ask, "Is it following us? Is it behind us?" Tim was still staring out the back window, his face completely drained of color in the dashboard lights. "No," he said, his voice shaky. It's still jogging. Same pace, same direction. It didn't even speed up or slow down, just watching us drive away." Somehow that was even more terrifying than if it had chased us. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't afraid of us, wasn't interested in pursuing us. It just continued on its way like we were a minor interruption in its evening jog. I kept driving way too fast for those dirt roads, taking Tim all the way to his house. We didn't say much for the rest of the drive. What could we say? Every few minutes one of us would mutter, "Did you see that?" Or, "What the hell was that thing?" But neither of us had answers. When we pulled up to Tim's place, a small farmhouse where he lived with his parents, I should have said goodnight and headed home. But the thought of driving back down those same roads alone in the dark, I couldn't do it. "Can I crash on your couch?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't think I can drive anymore tonight." Tim looked relieved. "I was about to ask you to stay, man. No way I'm letting you go back out there alone." We went inside quietly, trying not to wake his parents. We both took turns looking out the windows, making sure nothing had followed us. Tim's dog, a big German shepherd, was unusually agitated that night, pacing and whining at the door. That didn't help our nerves at all. We stayed up until almost dawn, talking in hushed voices about what we'd seen. We went through every possibility. A crazy person, someone with a medical condition, a guy in a costume. But we both knew none of those explanations made sense. The way it moved was too fluid, too natural. The hair covered every inch of its body uniformly, and those eyes, those weren't human eyes. The next morning, in the harsh light of day, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe we'd seen some kind of rare bear with mange. Maybe the darkness and shadows played tricks on us, but we both knew what we'd seen. For weeks afterward, I wouldn't drive that road after dark. When I finally did, I white-knuckled the steering wheel the entire time, jumping at every shadow. Tim and I talked about reporting it, but to who? What would we say? We saw a hairy man thing jogging in the woods. We'd sound like lunatics or drunks. Over the years, I've read about Bigfoot sightings and always felt a chill. But what we saw wasn't the classic Sasquatch from the Patterson film or anything like that. This was something different. More, I don't know, deliberate? Less animal-like? The fact that it was just jogging down a road, not crashing through the forest or hiding, it's like it had somewhere to be, a purpose. Tim moved away a few years later, but whenever we talk, that night inevitably comes up. Neither of us has ever seen anything like it again. I've spent decades trying to make sense of it, reading about cryptids and unexplained phenomena, but nothing quite matches what we encountered. I know how this sounds. I know most people reading this will think it was just two guys who had a few too many beers seeing things in the dark, but I know what I saw. That face, that flat, expressionless face, is burned into my memory. Sometimes I still dream about those eyes staring into the car, registering our presence without emotion or surprise. Whatever was jogging down that road in Crawford County wasn't human, and the most terrifying part isn't that it existed, it's that it acted like its presence there was the most natural thing in the world, like we were the ones who didn't belong. Story 16. I've been debating whether to share this for nearly 10 years now. Part of me worries people will just think I'm making it up or that I was on something that night. I wasn't. I wish I had been, because then at least I could chalk it all up to hallucinations. What happened to me and my buddy Jason in Big Cypress back in May of 2014 still messes with my head. I've gone over it 1,000 times, and I still can't explain it. Jason and I had been planning this camping trip for months. We both needed to get away from work stress, so we figured a few days in the backcountry of Big Cypress National Preserve would do us good. We'd both done plenty of camping before, but never in the Florida swamps. In hindsight, maybe we should have picked somewhere more familiar. We hiked about 4 miles in from the trailhead, wanting to get away from the more popular spots where other campers might be. The hike itself was beautiful. Lots of cypress trees with their knees poking up through tea-colored water, birds everywhere, even spotted a couple of small gators sunning themselves. By late afternoon, we found a decent spot on a dry hammock with enough space for our 2 tents and a small fire ring. The first weird thing I noticed was how the swamp sounds changed as the day went on. During setup, there were the usual birds, frogs, and insect noises you'd expect. But as evening approached, things got quieter. Not completely silent, that came later, but noticeably subdued. Jason didn't seem to pick up on it, or if he did, he didn't mention anything. We cooked some freeze-dried meals, had a couple beers, and sat around the fire bullshitting about work and life. Nothing unusual. The sun went down, and that's when the swamp went dead quiet. I mean, completely, unnaturally silent. No frogs, no insects, nothing. That's when I first got that feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. "You notice how quiet it got?" I asked Jason. He nodded, looking around. "Yeah, weird. Maybe a gator nearby or something?" That made sense. Predators can silence an area, but this felt different somehow. More complete. We kept talking, but I noticed we were both speaking more quietly now, like we didn't want to disturb whatever had hushed the swamp. It was around 10 o'clock when it happened. We were just about to call it a night when I heard it. My name, Mark, in Jason's voice. Except Jason was sitting right across from me, and his mouth hadn't moved. I looked at him, confused. "Did you just say something?" He shook his head. "No, why?" Before I could answer, I heard it again. "Mark!" This time from the trees behind our tents, maybe 30 yards back. It was Jason's voice, the exact tone I'd heard 1,000 times before, but not quite right. Like someone doing a really good impression, but missing something small. Jason stood up. "What the hell was that? You didn't hear it?" My heart was pounding now. I heard someone say your name. Sounded like me. He looked as freaked out as I felt. We both grabbed our flashlights and shined them toward the trees, but the beams only penetrated so far into the darkness. Nothing visible. Then it started. This weird chattering sound, like people talking really fast and low, but not in any language I recognized. Mixed in were clicks and grunts, and these sounds like someone coughing or making fake laughter. The sounds moved. First they were behind us, then off to the right, then somewhere else. Whatever was making them was circling our camp. "Hello?" Jason called out. "Someone there?" Bad move. The chattering stopped immediately. Then, from a different direction, "Someone there?" In Jason's exact voice and intonation. It wasn't an echo. It was a perfect copy of what he'd just said. That's when the smell hit us. Holy shit, that smell. Like someone had taken sweaty gym clothes, mixed them with garbage, added wet dog, and let it all rot for a week. It rolled through our camp in waves, stronger when the sounds were closer, fainter when they moved away. "We should get in the tents," I whispered. "No way," Jason said. "I'm not turning my back on whatever that is." He had a point. We stood back to back, flashlights out, scanning the darkness. Then we heard it. Wood-knocking sounds, first from one direction, then answered from another. Knock, knock, pause. Knock, knock, knock from somewhere else. They were communicating, passing signals around us. I was trying to keep my breathing under control when I saw movement at the edge of our firelight. I swung my flashlight toward it, and that's when I saw it. I still struggle to describe what I saw, but I'll try. It was massive. Taller than any man I've ever seen. Had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Impossibly wide shoulders, arms that hung too low, almost to its knees. It was just standing there, partially hidden by a cypress tree. As my flashlight beam caught its face, I saw a heavy brow and eyes. God, those eyes, reflecting the light like a deer's would, but intelligent. They were locked directly on me, not just looking in my direction, looking at me, studying me. Jason saw it too. "What the f—" he started, but before he could finish, another one appeared on the other side of the camp, just as big, just as wide. The smell doubled in intensity. The first one tilted its head, almost like a curious dog. Then, in my voice, "Mark." And then it added this nervous laugh I sometimes do when I'm uncomfortable. A perfect copy, down to the little catch in my throat I didn't even realize I had until I heard it mimicked back to me. I was frozen, completely paralyzed with fear. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing and hearing. These weren't people, they weren't bears, they were something else entirely. More knocking sounds came from the darkness behind them, and they both turned their heads toward the sound. The first one made a series of clicks, and that weird chattering again. The second one grunted and took a step back. They started to withdraw, moving backward without turning around, still watching us, still making those noises. We kept our flashlights on them until they disappeared into the darkness, but even then, we could hear them moving around the perimeter of our camp. All night long, they circled us, sometimes coming close enough that we could smell them, other times far enough that we could barely hear the knocking and chattering. We didn't sleep. We kept the fire blazing as high as we could get it and sat back to back with our knives out. Though what good a 4-inch blade would do against something that size, I don't know. The sun couldn't rise fast enough. As dawn broke, the sounds gradually moved further away until we couldn't hear them anymore. Birds started singing again. The swamp came back to life as if nothing had happened. We were exhausted and terrified, but we had to know if we'd imagined it all. We checked around the campsite and found exactly what I was afraid we'd find: footprints. Huge ones, at least 16 inches long, pressed deep into the wet ground near where the first creature had been standing. They had clear toe impressions, 5 of them, spread wide. Not bear tracks, not human tracks, something else. On a tree at the edge of the clearing, about 7 feet up, there was mud smeared in a pattern that looked deliberate. Stuck in the mud were several long, coarse hairs, reddish-brown and unlike any animal hair I've seen before. We didn't say much as we packed. We didn't need to. We just wanted out of there as fast as possible. The 4-mile hike back to the car felt like 40. Every snapping twig made us jump. Every bird call made us look over our shoulders. I've spent years trying to make sense of what happened that night. I've read about Bigfoot encounters, about creatures that can mimic human speech. I never believed any of it before. Now I don't know what to believe. What keeps me up at night isn't just that these things exist. It's that they were intelligent enough to use our voices against us. They were communicating with each other, coordinating. They could have rushed us at any point, but they didn't. They were studying us, learning from us. And that laugh, my own nervous laugh, repeated back to me. I hadn't even spoken that night. They had been watching us long enough to pick up on my mannerisms. Jason and I don't talk about it much anymore. We tried telling a couple of friends right after it happened, but the looks we got made it clear no one was going to believe us. I get it. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that somewhere in Big Cypress, there are creatures that can steal your voice and throw it back at you from the darkness. Creatures that communicate with each other using methods we barely understand. Creatures that are smart enough to recognize that we're different from them, but similar enough to be worth studying. I haven't been camping since. Jason has, but never in Florida, and never without at least 4 other people with him. Sometimes when my phone rings and I hear his voice, I get this split second of panic before I remind myself it's really him. The worst part is not knowing why. Why did they surround us? Why mimic our voices? Were they trying to communicate or lure us into the darkness? Were they just curious? Or did they have other intentions? I'll never know. But I do know that I heard my name called in my friend's voice while he sat silently across from me. I saw something that shouldn't exist watching me from the edge of the firelight. And I heard my own nervous laugh coming from a creature that was decidedly not human. I don't expect anyone to believe this. Hell, sometimes I still try to convince myself it was all just some elaborate prank or shared hallucination. But then I remember those eyes reflecting my flashlight beam, intelligent and focused. I remember the smell, and I remember my name in my own voice, coming from something that had no right to know it. There are things in those swamps that science hasn't explained, things that can speak your name in voices they shouldn't know, and if you ever hear your own voice calling to you from the darkness when you know damn well you haven't spoken, don't answer. Don't even look. Just get out as fast as you can. Story 17. I've always felt safe in the wilderness. That's why I kept taking my family out there. I wanted my kids to grow up appreciating nature the way I do, to breathe that clean air, to see stars that don't exist in city skies. But what happened in the Black Hills back in 2007 changed everything for us. Sometimes I wake up sweating, thinking about those eyes staring back at me through the glass. I'm not writing this to convince anyone of anything. I just need to get it down somewhere. It was July, middle of summer, and we'd planned this camping trip for months. My wife and I have 2 kids. Our daughter was 11 then, our son just 8. We drove out to Black Hills National Forest in South Dakota with our small pull-behind camper. Nothing fancy, just something better than tents that would keep us comfortable if the weather turned. We specifically chose an undeveloped site off one of those winding gravel forest roads. We wanted solitude, to really feel like we were in nature, you know. The first day was perfect. We hiked up to this amazing ridge where you could see for miles. The kids collected rocks and pine cones, spotted deer tracks, and my wife took photos of everything. Normal family stuff. We were all exhausted by late afternoon and headed back to our campsite, where I fired up our little portable grill. That night we built a small fire, nothing crazy, just enough to cook over and then roast marshmallows. My son kept burning his, but my daughter was meticulous about getting hers golden brown. We sat around telling stories until the stars came out. The night was so clear you could see the Milky Way stretching across the sky. These are the moments you hope your kids remember, you know? The good stuff. When it got late, we put out the fire completely. I'm always careful about that, and tucked into the camper for the night. The kids were in their bunk, my wife and I in ours. Everyone fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know exactly what time it was when I first woke up, somewhere after midnight. There were these faint sounds outside. Nothing alarming, just the rustling of brush. It could have been anything. Deer, raccoons, whatever. My wife stirred too. Did you hear that? She whispered. Yeah, I said. Probably just animals. We listened for a minute or two, but when the sound stopped, we both drifted back to sleep. I've spent enough time in the woods to know most noises at night are harmless. About an hour later, maybe 1:30 in the morning, the camper shifted slightly. It was like something had brushed against the side. Not hard, but enough that I felt it. I sat up listening. My first thought was maybe a bear was out there, curious about our food, even though we'd secured everything properly. I considered getting up to check, even reached for my flashlight. But then I thought about what you're supposed to do with wildlife. Make noise from inside, don't confront them. So I decided against going out. The movement stopped, and I convinced myself it was nothing to worry about. That was my mistake. Around 3 in the morning, I jerked awake to the most terrifying sound I've ever heard, my kids screaming. Not just crying or calling out from a nightmare, but full-on shrieking, pure terror. My wife and I shot up immediately. The kids were clutching their blankets, pointing at the window next to their bunk. The face at the window. They were shouting, over and over. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward their bunk. The window curtain had been left partially open to let in some air. It had been warm earlier. I leaned over to look out, shining the flashlight beam through the glass. For just a split second, I caught something massive moving outside. I raised the beam higher, trying to see better. And that's when I froze completely. Less than a foot away from me, separated only by a thin pane of glass, was a face staring directly back at me. Not a human face, not a bear or any animal I could recognize. This face was huge, wider than the entire window frame. Dark hair or fur framed a broad, leathery face that looked almost like a person's, but not quite. Its brow was heavy and sloped down, the nose was wide and flat, and its lips were thin lines pressed together. But the eyes... God, the eyes. They were amber-colored, deep-set under that prominent brow, and they didn't blink once as they stared at me. They reflected my flashlight slightly, giving them this faint glow that made them look even more unnatural. What hit me next was the steam fogging up the glass. It was breathing, right there, inches away, exhaling against our window. I could see each breath create a new patch of condensation on the glass, and then it hit me. Our camper window was nearly 7 feet off the ground. The way our camper was designed, the windows sat high. For this thing's face to be at that window, looking in at eye level with me, it had to be standing at least 8 feet tall. Maybe taller. I'm not a small guy and I'm not easily frightened, but in that moment, I felt like a child. I shouted, I don't even remember what I said, and slammed my palm against the glass, hoping to scare it off. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it actually leaned in closer, its wide nostrils flaring like it was smelling us through the glass. My wife was behind me now, holding the kids who were still crying. She kept saying, "Oh my God," over and over. We stared at each other, me and this thing, for what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 or 6 seconds. Then it made this low grunt sound that I could feel more than hear, and stepped back from the window. I heard heavy footsteps moving away, crunching through the underbrush, heading back into the trees. None of us slept after that. We huddled together in the main sleeping area, lights on, talking in whispers. The kids were terrified it would come back. My son kept asking if it was a monster, and honestly, I didn't know what to tell him. My daughter, who's always been the logical one, kept saying it had to be a bear standing on its hind legs, but I knew that wasn't right. I've seen plenty of bears. This was something else entirely. When the first light of dawn finally came, I worked up the courage to go outside. My wife begged me not to, but I needed to see if there was any evidence. I needed to know I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't. Underneath the window where the face had appeared were footprints. Not paw prints, footprints. They looked almost human, but massive. The longest one stretched nearly 18 inches from heel to toe. They were pressed deep into the dirt, suggesting whatever made them was extremely heavy. I followed them to the edge of our campsite where they disappeared into the denser forest. When I went back to the camper, I noticed something else. On the window glass were these faint smears, like oils from skin or fur where the face had pressed against it. I ran my finger across one of the marks, and it felt slightly greasy. That was enough for me. I told my wife we were leaving immediately. The kids refused to even get out of the camper while we packed up. My son was still crying, and my daughter kept looking around nervously. I've never broken down camp so quickly in my life. We were on the road within 30 minutes, and I drove non-stop until we were completely out of the Black Hills. For years afterward, our kids refused to go camping. My son had nightmares for months. My daughter became obsessed with researching cryptids and unexplained phenomena, trying to make sense of what she saw. Even now, at college age, she won't sleep with her curtains open. As for my wife and me, we eventually started camping again. but never in isolated spots. Always in developed campgrounds with plenty of other people around. I've spent countless hours trying to rationalize what we experienced that night. I've looked into local wildlife, into the folklore of the region, into scientific explanations for what we might have seen. Nothing fits. Nothing explains a creature of that size, with that face, with those intelligent eyes that looked at us with what seemed like deliberate curiosity. The thing that haunts me most isn't just what it was. It's the way it looked at us. There was awareness there, intelligence. It wasn't just some animal stumbling across our campsite. It came to our window specifically. It looked in at our sleeping children. It studied us, and when I think about its breath fogging up the glass, that's when I know for certain this wasn't a story or myth or misidentified animal. Something enormous and unknown came within feet of our sleeping children that night, looking in at them like they were exhibits in a zoo. I've never told this story publicly before. Most people would think I'm crazy or making it up. But I know what I saw, what my family saw. Those amber eyes, that massive frame standing taller than any human could. Those footprints in the dirt the next morning. Sometimes I still check the windows at night before I go to bed, half expecting to see that face staring back at me again. It's been 16 years. And I still don't have answers. Just the memory of hot breath on glass and eyes that shouldn't exist watching my children sleep. Story 18. I've never told this story to many people. When I do, they either think I'm crazy or making it up for attention, but I'm tired of keeping it to myself. What happened to me back in 1968 has haunted me for decades, and writing it down might help me make sense of it. Maybe someone else has seen what I saw. Maybe I'm not alone. It was September 11th, 1968. I remember the date clearly because I'd been planning this solo camping trip for months as a way to clear my head after a rough summer. I'd set up at a small campsite just outside of Billings, Montana, in Yellowstone County. It was beautiful there, tall pines, clean air, and enough isolation to finally get some peace and quiet. I had this old camper, nothing fancy, just a little Scotty trailer that was comfortable enough for one person. I'd parked it in a spot about half a mile from the nearest occupied campsite. I wanted solitude, and I got it. Maybe too much of it, looking back. That particular day had been perfect. I'd spent the morning fishing, caught enough for dinner, and spent the afternoon just hiking around, taking photos with my old Kodak. By evening, I was tired in that good way you get after spending a full day outdoors. I cooked the fish over my little campfire, had a couple beers, and was inside the camper reading by lantern light when everything changed. It must have been around 10:30 at night. The woods around me had gone quiet, that deep, nighttime quiet where you can hear every twig snap for what seems like miles. I was just about to turn in when I heard something moving outside. At first, I figured it was probably a deer, or maybe even a bear. Wildlife was common in the area, and I'd seen plenty of tracks during my hike that day. The footsteps were heavy, though, methodical. Nothing like the quick, delicate steps of a deer. Whatever it was big, and it was circling my camper. My first instinct was to stay perfectly still. Growing up in Montana, I'd been taught that most animals will leave you alone if you don't provoke them. So I sat there on my small bed, book forgotten in my lap, listening as the footsteps came closer, then stopped right outside my door. The camper had these thin aluminum walls that didn't do much to keep out sound or cold, and there was a small window in the door with a flimsy curtain covering it. I could see a shadow through that curtain, a massive shadow that blocked out the moonlight completely. Then I heard it, a sound I've never been able to properly describe since. It was like someone trying to gargle water while whistling at the same time, low and throaty, but with this high-pitched edge that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't aggressive exactly, more like curious. That's when I made my first mistake. Instead of staying quiet, I shifted on the bed to reach for the flashlight on my small table. The floor creaked, just slightly, but in that silence, it might as well have been a gunshot. The shadow moved, and before I could even react, the curtain on my door window was pushed aside. I still remember the sick feeling in my stomach when I saw what was looking in at me. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before or since. The face pressed against my window was massive, ape-like, but not exactly like any ape I'd seen in books or at the zoo. Its features were more defined than a gorilla's, with deep-set eyes that caught the lantern light and reflected it back like a cat's. The face was framed by thick reddish hair that covered every visible inch of skin. And behind that face were shoulders so broad they spanned most of my doorway. I'm not a small guy, 6'1", and about 190 pounds back then. But this thing made me feel tiny. It had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller, and I'd guess it weighed somewhere between 600 and 800 pounds, 100 and 800 pounds of solid muscle. The creature's head was oddly shaped, sort of pointed at the top, not rounded like a human or ape. And its hair wasn't uniformly reddish-brown. There were patches of white scattered across what I could see of its body, almost like it was aging or had some kind of vitiligo. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably just a few seconds. Those eyes, they weren't animal eyes. There was something in them, intelligence, curiosity. I don't know, but I knew it was looking at me, not just seeing a shape or potential threat like an animal would. That's when I lost it. The fear that had frozen me suddenly exploded and I screamed. Not a manly yell or a warning shout, a full-on terrified scream that I'm still embarrassed about. The creature's reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of attacking or roaring back, it jumped backward like I'd startled it, like my scream had scared it. Its head jerked back, and it made that gargle whistle sound again, but louder and faster, almost like an exclamation. In that moment of confusion, I lunged for my pistol. I kept a .38 revolver for protection when camping alone. I wasn't thinking clearly, just operating on pure fight-or-flight instinct. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the gun twice, getting it pointed toward the door. I expected the thing to charge then, to tear the thin aluminum door off its hinges and attack. I was already picturing how badly this was about to go for me, but it didn't attack. Instead, it did something that still confuses me to this day. It cocked its head to one side, almost like a dog does when it hears a strange sound. Then it leaned forward again, more cautiously this time, and looked at me through the doorway. Its eyes moved from my face to the gun in my hands. I swear it understood what I was holding. Its posture changed. Not aggressive, just wary. We had this bizarre standoff for maybe 30 seconds, neither of us moving. Then without any warning or aggression, it simply turned away. Just turned and walked back toward the tree line, its massive form silhouetted against the night sky. Its gait was strange, not quite human, not quite ape, with these long, powerful strides that covered ground quickly. I watched through the window as it disappeared into the trees, occasionally glancing back over its shoulder at my camper. Once it was gone, I sat there with my gun still pointed at the door, shaking and sweating like I'd run a marathon. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I kept the gun in my hand, eyes fixed on that door, ears straining for any sound of its return. Every creak of the trees in the wind, every distant animal call made me jump. When morning finally came, I cautiously stepped outside, half expecting to find nothing, to convince myself it had been a nightmare or hallucination. But there they were, footprints, massive human-like footprints that sank deep into the soft dirt around my camper. They were at least 16 inches long and unbelievably wide, with 5 distinct toe impressions. I took photos of them with shaking hands, but when I got the film developed weeks later, they came out blurry and indistinct, useless as evidence. What struck me most as I stood there in the morning light wasn't just the creature's size or appearance, it was its behavior. It could have easily broken into my camper if it wanted to. I'd seen bears tear through sturdier structures without much effort, but it didn't. It looked, it observed, and when startled, it retreated. It was curious. That's the word that keeps coming back to me. Not hungry, not territorial, not aggressive. Curious. Like it was as interested in studying me as I was terrified of it. I packed up camp in record time and was on the road before 9 that morning. I drove straight through to Billings and spent the night in a motel, still jumpy and looking over my shoulder constantly. When I got back home, I started researching. This was 1968, remember. No internet, just libraries and newspaper archives. I found scattered reports of similar sightings across the Pacific Northwest and parts of Montana. Stories of a creature locals called Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Some of the descriptions matched what I'd seen almost exactly. The reddish hair, the massive height and build, the curious rather than aggressive behavior. What really got me was reading other witnesses describe that same gargle whistle sound. How could people, hundreds of miles apart, who'd never met each other, describe the same unusual vocalization if they weren't all experiencing something real? I've spent decades trying to understand what I saw that night. I've joined research groups, attended conferences, even gone back to that same area several times, though never alone. I've heard theories ranging from undiscovered primates to interdimensional beings, from government experiments to mass hallucinations. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is what I saw and what I felt. The intelligence in those eyes wasn't animal intelligence. The restraint it showed wasn't animal restraint. There was something else about it, something I still can't explain. It's been over 50 years now. I'm an old man, and I still wake up sometimes hearing that gargle whistle sound in my dreams. I still flinch when something passes by a window unexpectedly, and I still wonder, what if I hadn't screamed? What if I'd stayed calm? Would it have tried to communicate somehow? Was there a missed opportunity there that night in 1968? I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, there are days I barely believe it myself. But I know what I saw, looking through my camper door that night in the Montana wilderness. And whatever it was looking back.